Together, we will make America great again.
RPN is not responsible for the views, actions, statements, or opinions of its guests, advertisers, or even its viewers. The information contained in this program is not to be confused with medical or legal advice. An appearance on this platform is not necessarily an endorsement, but as always, we encourage you to do your own research. Enjoy the show. Good evening, everyone. And, of course, welcome back. Yes, my friends, to another very exciting episode of Red Pill News Live. Hope you guys are having a lovely day. Thank you so much for joining us. You guys are saying that the audio is low. Well, if I turn up the audio much more on the music, then I don't want my voice to get drowned out. So can you tell me, is it still good enough for my audio to come through over the music? The music is meant to be sort of background. It's not meant to overtake me. All right, guys, we have a lot to talk about. Thank you, Blue Patches. Appreciate it. You know, it's also perhaps, maybe you guys are watching on a phone and the speakers are not that good. You might have crud that is gumming up the works. You can dip that stuff in some alcohol, take a Q-tip, maybe a toothpick to it, either way. All right, either way, we've got so much to talk about. As you can see, major dropping information coming from the Supreme Court of the United States of America, effectively ending racial gerrymandering, beginning with Louisiana, but we're already beginning to see a number of other states falling in line. So do me a favor, sit back, relax, and grab your popcorn, because we're going to be right back after this. Recently, the U.S. Department of Energy announced $2.7 billion in contracts to restore domestic uranium enrichment capabilities. This isn't just government spending, it's a declaration of intent, because America needs uranium, domestic uranium, and it needs it now. So here's the reality. The U.S. consumes over 50 million pounds of uranium every single year, but we produce less than 1 million pounds domestically. Obviously, that leaves America 98% dependent on foreign suppliers for our supply. It's a critical vulnerability for national security, power generation, and advanced weapons systems. With Russia controlling much of the global enrichment capacity and escalating tensions in Iran threatening nuclear supply, the stakes could not be higher, which is why the White House has made it crystal clear. America must develop its own supply chain. And this is where Kirkstone Metals comes in. They trade under KSM in Canada and KSMCF in the US. They've got decades of uranium and junior mining expertise, and Kirkstone's leadership team knows how to turn exploration projects into real value. But the question is, can they do it again? Kirkstone controls two 100% owned uranium projects strategically located in the Athabasca Basin. This is the richest uranium district on the planet. Same area, same world-class neighborhood, and at their flagship Key Lake project, drilling has already hit high-grade uranium right near the surface, but the team truly believes the real prize lies deep underground. So using a playbook based on the decade's biggest discoveries, they're hunting the massive source below. So let's talk about the Athabasca Basin. It's home to multi-billion-dollar names like NextGen Energy and Denison Mines, but the real upside, it's often the junior explorers that are operating right next door. The Athabasca Basin has delivered over 20% of the world's uranium discoveries, with an estimated $200 to $300 billion worth of uranium identified in the ground, and yet Kirkstone is still sitting at a market cap below $12 million. That's an enormous disconnect between what's found in this district and how some companies are valued today. On January 14th, the U.S. administration reinforced their commitment to domestic energy security, invoking Section 232 via an executive order. It's a formal declaration of resource independence, and it goes beyond support. It's a mandate. Energy security is now national security, and the U.S. government is deploying its full fiscal and regulatory tools to secure the nuclear fuel cycle in North America. Kirkstone Metals, trading as KSMCF in the U.S. and KSM in Canada, is strategically positioned to capitalize on this shift. Now, uranium prices have surged, and some analysts project prices could exceed $100 per pound by 2026 as demand outpaces supply. Federal momentum has already begun to translate into dollars on the ground, including billions in planned funding for domestic uranium enrichment capacity. The sector is entering one of its most active drilling seasons in years, and with its flagship drill program approved, Kirkstone has exploration underway, and they're advancing with a focus on execution. Some companies operating in the district are valued at over $10 billion, and with the U.S. pushing for domestic uranium, Kirkstone could potentially become a leading beneficiary of the reshoring mandate. So if you want to learn more about this critical mineral story and about a team that has delivered big results in the past, check out the link in the description. And a very special thanks to Kirkstone Metals for making today's video possible. All right, welcome back, everyone. Thank you very much for joining us. We have so much to discuss. I'd like to begin today with a story I was unable to bring to you yesterday because of the time limits we have. But first of all, I think a lot of people have always figured that Jeffrey Epstein and the sick elite pedophile class that he was running with was not merely trading in young girls. Undoubtedly, there must have been abuse of boys and men as well. And now, in New Mexico, as part of the ongoing investigation into Zorro Ranch, or what was previously known as Jeffrey Epstein's Zorro Ranch, new reports have begun to emerge of multiple young men who claim that they were drugged and raped by many of these so-called super predators that would hang around Jeffrey Epstein so that they could gain access to vulnerable young people. Now, we've heard a lot of horrific, terrible things coming out of Jeffrey Epstein's various properties, and these new allegations are just right in line with everything we've learned before. Young people being drugged, being raped, being trafficked at Jeffrey Epstein's Zorro Ranch, now beginning to filter to the surface. It is a horrifying new allegation, and again, I don't think anyone is too surprised to hear that this is happening. We've already had some very odd things coming out of Zorro Ranch. There was Jeffrey Epstein's plan to create a master race, a baby factory, if you will, a eugenicist's paradise. And of course, those babies were not merely going to be used to repopulate the planet with Jeffrey Epstein's DNA. Undoubtedly, those children were going to be used for the same type of horrific acts that we have been fighting against for decades. Now, these allegations have just come to prominence as a result of a brand new documentary that was produced by 60 Minutes Australia. They were initially reported by British newspaper The Sun, and now they have begun to filter across the Atlantic, and people here are finally talking about them. Kind of ironic, considering that New Mexico is in the United States of America. It's in our own backyard. Why is it that these allegations first had to arise on another continent entirely before they made their way back here? Undoubtedly, I think that the people who participated in these disgusting acts, probably based upon their wealth, their power, their influence, they made sure that mainstream media here in the United States was not willing or able to cover them. So New Mexico, as you know, has reopened their investigation after several years ago. It was initially taken by Maureen Comey's office at the SDNY, and it was supposed to have been followed up on, and then they were supposed to go back to New Mexico and tell them everything they had found. None of that transpired. Merely the investigation and the materials that had been developed by the various investigative bodies in New Mexico were simply absconded, taken away, and then they were perhaps destroyed. Now, coming from Reuters, a woman by the name of Maria Jose Rodriguez Cadiz. She heads the Solace Sexual Assault Services Center in Santa Fe, New Mexico. It's the only, literally the only existing support center of its type in the entire region. She spoke with Reuters, and she said in an interview that in 2019, which is, of course, the year that Jeffrey Epstein was arrested during President Trump's first term, and then shortly after, somebody was found deceased in his jail cell. There were around 45 individuals who stepped forward looking to speak with the center, hoping to get any information that they could, hoping to be able to gain access to therapy or any other such related services that might be available to victims of sexual abuse, and in particular, victims of sexual abuse that participated in events at Zorro Ranch. Now, she estimated between perhaps 1/4 to 1/2 of those people who contacted the center were from women, and they said that they themselves had been directly abused at the ranch, although she added that unfortunately the center did not keep detailed records. But dozens of people who were in need of information or direct services related to the human trafficking network of Jeffrey Epstein and the crimes that were coming forward all came forward and spoke to either her or others at her organization, because they too had had a similar and unfortunate circumstance take place. Let's go ahead and take a look at this video right here. This is an interesting video because it features Shantae Davies. Shantae Davies is a witness who we've spoken about before. I find her to be less than credible. However, it doesn't mean that she doesn't have some information that may be useful. Let's go ahead and take a listen.
Girls waking up in sort of like a dark room with like a female doctor standing over them, feeling like maybe there is some kind of procedure that had happened that they weren't aware of. And I believe this is in the file. Sure, there's something in there about a baby actually being born and then just disappearing, like Ghislaine taking it. I personally never witnessed anything like that, but I do remember overhearing conversations about trying to create the perfect baby, the perfect gene pool. And I know.
Okay, so for some reason my screen is not updating. Hold on just a second. Okay, I'll start the video over, and let me just add the caveat. The reason I find Shantae Davies to be less than credible is because she has had a changing and evolving story throughout the years. Initially, she had claimed that she was successfully able to get away from Jeffrey Epstein before anything had happened to make her a victim. It was only after he passed away that her story changed, and then she suddenly became a victim. She had also admitted on camera to, well, in a recorded phone call with authorities, that she had helped to lure other girls into Jeffrey Epstein's clutches.
Girls waking up in sort of like a dark room with like a female doctor standing over them, feeling like maybe there is some kind of procedure that had happened that they weren't aware of. And I believe this is in the file. Sure, there's something in there about a baby actually being born and then just disappearing, like Ghislaine taking it. I personally never witnessed anything like that, but I do remember overhearing conversations about trying to create the perfect baby, the perfect gene pool. And I know that there was sort of a hunt, if you will, for the perfect gene pool.
Zorro was a wacky hideaway for Epstein and his cronies, and a place to enact their most freakish fantasies, including at one point a plan for a controversial designer baby and human cloning project, in which emails from the files show the maniacal Epstein was prepared to invest in.
All right, so all of this, obviously, we've learned ourselves directly from reviewing the information in the files themselves and these various emails. This was a project from a young scientist that had come to Jeffrey Epstein, somebody he had already previously been working with, and suggesting that he had the ability to create these so-called designer babies. Jeffrey Epstein also spoke with women that he was having these relations with. There were plenty of them who were victims, and then there were plenty others who were more than happy to just collect the money and the comfort that Jeffrey Epstein was willing to offer them so that they could submit to whatever his desires were. And of course, Jeffrey Epstein had a certain taste. Younger women, younger girls most often, even though young women also were part of the equation.
Anyone could imagine The allegations span everything from the harvesting of sex organs to allegations of women having forced abortions or forced pregnancies, or coerced pregnancies. I think when we think about the stories and the span of stories, it sounds fictional. It sounds like a horror film.
It does sound like a horror film, but quite often art imitates life. Those horror films are often based on some of the most terrible things you can possibly imagine happening, and they happen in the real world. Let's see. There's a difference between having the perfect baby, and then there's the idea of creating the perfect baby using eugenics and a laboratory that you've built in your home, and then paying the world's top genetic scientists to do that. So nobody's twisting words here, Boxing Cat. There's a big difference between wanting to make sure you have a baby that isn't a flipper baby, has all of its fingers and toes, and grows up to be smart and has all of the possible amenities that might be necessary to make sure that it's successful in life. And then there's what Joseph Mengele and his friends were trying to do in using the idea of eugenics to breed the perfect baby, and that's what Jeffrey Epstein was doing. There's a very, very fine line there between the two. It's Tony Man says, "Hi Zach, Lisa, and all my friends in the chat. Getting stronger every day. Good to hear, buddy. I'm just impatient, but the surgeon said it could be as long as 6 months for recovery. I don't think it will take that long. Let me tell you something, brother, what you had done, that type of surgery on your back, don't push it, all right? Give yourself as much time as you need to recover, because you've only got one body. You've got a new opportunity here to make sure that you use it properly. The last thing you want is an injury in the midst of just having major surgery. So just all I'm saying is don't push yourself too hard. All right, now, the New York Post has also reported that a man actually claims that he met Jeffrey Epstein, was brought to the ranch, and was drugged. This is from U.S. Representative Melanie Stansbury, a Democrat from New Mexico. She also told 60 Minutes Australia that he describes in detail a scene in which multiple young men were raped at the ranch in front of him after he was drugged. That Epstein and Ghislaine were serial abusers. They were really super predators, and it's just how they lived their lives. Now, here is, well, actually, we've seen this clip before, so I'm not going to play that again. And then, of course, you've got the reopening into the New Mexico aspect of this, and Maria discussing the context that she had with these multiple women, dozens of women, who had reported that they too were abused. Now, the one thing I've been waiting for is the forensic examination, the use of dogs, cadaver dogs, and perhaps ground-penetrating LiDAR to look in the hills surrounding Zorro Ranch, both on the private land and then, of course, the publicly owned land as well. As far as I'm aware, nothing has come of that yet, and I don't know if the initial young man who stepped forward and made the claim that those bodies were buried out there, whether or not they've been able to identify who he was, and perhaps he can help. All right. Continuing, thank you to Hogleg71 for the can and the cookie. And then Trump1 says, much love, Red Pill 78 fam. Thanks, Zach, for bringing up the latest and greatest every day. Gotta lurk now. Okay, well, thank you for being here. All right, now, this is a tragic update on a story that we reported on after, well, I mean, a number of times we've actually talked about this, but Greg Biffle was a NASCAR legend, and he did a ton to help with relief efforts and efforts to save people who were stranded after Hurricane Helene. And he was killed in a crash. And apparently, after he was killed in this crash, and it wasn't just him, it was him and his family, the very same day, somebody started draining Biffle's bank accounts. And they also changed the logins and passwords on he and his wife's financial accounts, their crypto accounts, their Venmo accounts, and then they just sucked all of the money out. And they actually went and broke into their home and stole tens of thousands of dollars of stuff from inside. Now, the reason this is coming out is because there is a warrant for someone who is alleged to have partaken in this activity. Let's take a listen.
his wife, and their...
And just so everybody is aware, this audio is mono. It's only going to be coming out of one speaker, and there's nothing I can do about that. But let me see if there's anything I can do to turn it up so that it's not so low.
Their 2 children crashed, killing all on board. Just hours later, at 2 a.m. the next day, an email appeared in the inbox of Greg Biffle stating, quote, "I heard you dead. Rest in hell." That same day, documents say information associated with bank accounts owned by Biffle and his wife Christina were changed. The information included email accounts, phone numbers, and passwords. Fraudulent activity was also detected on Christina's Venmo account. On December 30th, a fraudulent check was cashed from one of Biffle's bank accounts. Another 3 checks were also attempted to be cashed from that same account. All of this led up to the night of January 7th, going into the early morning hours of January 8th. That's when documents say someone broke into Biffle's home in Mooresville. This footage, released by law enforcement, shows that person walking throughout the house. It is believed to be a woman. Documents say the woman had previous knowledge of the home, including security camera placement and the location of Biffle's closet and safe room. The woman allegedly spent 6 hours in the home, taking $30,000 in cash, multiple guns, and jewelry. On January 16th, the celebration of life was held for Biffle and his family. At that event, detectives believe they identified a woman who matched the suspect caught on camera in the Biffle's home. They say she was a friend of the Biffle family. Documents also say a license plate reader spotted a vehicle associated with that family friend near the Biffle home just before the suspect is seen on camera inside. Shortly after, police released a picture of the suspect. Court documents say that same woman abandoned plans to go to a gathering of friends and instead went to Pennsylvania. Since then, a home and storage unit were searched by police. No suspects have been named and no arrests have been made. Documents claim in all, from both the home and bank accounts, hundreds of thousands of dollars have been stolen.
Completely disgusting, the type of behavior that somebody could engage in something like this. I mean, in the immediate wake of a tragedy such as this, going into every single one of their accounts, stealing as much as you could, ransacking their home for 6 hours. You know, I've never talked about this before, but I had a friend, somebody from the chat actually, who passed away. PJ knows, because PJ was friends with him too. He passed away some time ago, and he had left me some stuff in his will, and same with PJ. And in the wake of his death, the people who were administering his will just decided not to honor it. They basically just completely kept everything. And, you know, I've seen this before. When my father died, I'm good with my sister now, but when my father died, there was a rift that developed over people in the family not feeling like they were getting enough. And it wasn't like my dad was a rich person. I mean, he just had a bunch of stuff that he had accumulated over his life. And it was one of the most disturbing and just disgusting things to me to see how somebody's death can be so immediately capitalized on by the people that were around them. Seeing them no longer as a person, but only seeing them as a source of grift. And it never ceases to amaze me how that can happen. When my dad died, you know, in my mind, I'm thinking like, okay, you know, my father's gone. I am alone in this world. My best friend is no longer here. Never going to be able to wake up in the morning and call my dad again. He's never going to see his granddaughter again. I'm never going to hear him open the garage door and come in. I'm never going to be sitting there waiting for him at his dinner table for him to come in. You know, those are the things that I'm thinking about. And there are some people who see somebody's gone and just like, wow, here's an opportunity to just steal everything that I possibly can. It's really disturbing to me that this is how some people see these things. They see somebody is gone and they think, how can I capitalize on this? And that's what this woman did. Now, hundreds of thousands of dollars stolen from the Biffle family accounts. Obviously, I don't know where that money was intended to go. I mean, the Biffle family, they were rather young. They might not have even had a will set up. But, I think that's highly unlikely. This guy was fairly successful. Somebody in his position, they've got the end-of-life stuff already set up. But there are currently multiple suspects. They're in multiple states. The FBI and the authorities cannot say how they're connected because they're still investigating. The home robbery is maybe not even connected to the actual electronic thievery from their personal accounts. Again, it's just terrible. So it was Greg Biffle, his wife Christina, and their 2 children. They were all killed in a plane crash in December. So not long after takeoff, basically, they had some problems, and the plane went down, and everybody died. Now, if you don't know who he was a NASCAR racer, won 19 times over 13 seasons, 6 times in 2005. Notable wins include the 2005 Southern 500 and the 2003 Pepsi 400, both here in my hometown of Daytona. He also won the Xfinity Series Championship in 2002 and the Truck Series title in 2000. He finished in the top 10 in points 6 times, and he was named one of NASCAR's 75 greatest drivers just a couple of years ago. So let me see. I think that this video is going to have that woman's face without the titles on screen. So let's take a look. Apparently, they just kicked the door down. And it looked like maybe she was trying to obscure the camera. So we only get just that little sliver of her face. Okay. Well, all I can say is that considering that they've done a number of raids, they've served warrants, they are now seeking communications, probably electronic devices, I think it's only a matter of time before we can find who was responsible for that. Not a random break-in at all. It was basically as soon as that person learned of the Biffle family dying tragically, they immediately went in there. And the fact that it's a woman, she had access to things previously, it could likely have been a housekeeper or some type of maintenance person. Either way, might have been a good friend of Christina. Who knows? All right. Now, over the weekend, right before the official White House Correspondents' Dinner, Jimmy Kimmel and his friends had a fake White House Correspondents' Dinner. And in that fake event, he told a joke about Melania Trump having the glow of an expectant widow. It was already a tactless joke, but it looked even worse after the attempt on President Trump and others in the administration's life on Saturday night by Cole Thomas Allen. So it was put out over the weekend that President Trump was not happy about that. Melania also made a statement about it, and he actually had mentioned something about Jimmy Kimmel being fired. He said that before. He obviously doesn't like Jimmy Kimmel. Jimmy Kimmel doesn't like him, and Jimmy Kimmel has made a number of jokes, supposed jokes, about the president being murdered. Well, now the FCC has actually stepped in, and they've officially placed ABC and, more importantly, their parent company, Walt Disney, under investigation. So according to the FCC's final order, which was published early yesterday, Disney and their subcompany, ABC, is now being forced to file for early license renewal applications so that they can maintain their broadcast license. And that would be for all 8 of their owned and operated television stations. They've got the next 30 days to comply, which is early in terms of their normal renewal schedule. It should have stretched under normal circumstances to sometime between 2028 and 2031. Now, the FCC has stated they've already been investigating Disney's ABC stations for what's called possible violations of the Communications Act of 1934 and agency rules, including the prohibition of unlawful discrimination. Regulators said that ABC had responded to prior letters of inquiry, but additional actions are now appropriate. So, from the FCC has been investigating the Walt Disney Company, its American Broadcasting Company, and its subsidiaries, collectively Disney's ABC, for compliance with its obligations as a licensed broadcaster. Now, there are a variety of different types of TV stations and channels that exist out there. ABC, NBC, CBS, and I believe PBS. PBS is public broadcasting. ABC, NBC, CBS, those are the three publicly licensed spectrum channels that exist out there. And as such, they have certain laws that they have to adhere to. And that is from Congress. And then, of course, Congress delegated authority to the Federal Communications Commission. Federal Communications Commission sets rules on good behavior for these stations to retain access to that public broadcast spectrum. And if they do not adhere to those rules, well, then they run the risk of losing their licensing agreement. And that would mean, of course, that ABC or any of these other stations would no longer be able to broadcast using that spectrum. Now, they could always go to a traditional broadcast model. They could broadcast online. They could become a cable television channel. They could become a purely subscription channel. But I think everybody knows that the real money is in the spectrum that is handed to them by the government, because it automatically puts them on the televisions of everybody who has a TV that can access that digital spectrum. You don't necessarily need cable to be able to access that spectrum. So they say that Disney and ABC have been investigated for possible violations of the Communications Act of 1934 and the FCC's rules, including the agency's prohibition on unlawful discrimination. While Disney's ABC has purported to respond to 2 FCC letter of inquiries as part of this investigation, the FCC has determined that additional actions are appropriate at this time. Specifically, FCC rules provide that whenever the FCC regards an application for renewal of license as essential to the proper conduct of an investigation, the FCC has the authority to call the broadcaster's licenses in for early renewal. In doing so, it both allows the FCC to conduct an ongoing investigation and enables the FCC to ensure that the broadcaster has been meeting its public interest obligations more broadly. Now, that public interest obligation is really what's in question here. None of these other stations, if they're just a cable station or they are paying to broadcast their content in one way or another, they're not required to meet public obligations. They're not meant to have any sort of fairness in the way that they speak or, discriminate or not discriminate. So the FCC determines that by calling in ABC Disney's licenses for that early renewal under the Communication Act public interest standard, it's essential within the meaning of agency regulations. Therefore, Disney's ABC is hereby directed to file license renewals for all of their licensed TV stations within 30 days. In other words, May 28th, 2026. Now, I took the time to sort of lay all of that out because I'm kind of shocked at how many people are not aware of that. I saw a video that Glenn Beck had put out through his platform. I don't even know. It might have just come out on Twitter. Or it might have been on his website or something. Now, he basically said that the government should not get involved in this fight between Jimmy Kimmel and President Trump in any respect. But again, the fact of the matter is that the only reason ABC is able to broadcast on the spectrum that it does is because they adhere to the law and the rules as set forth by the Federal Communications Commission. And unfortunately, that is a government entity. Their very existence depends upon their adhesion to the very regulations that the government puts out there. So Disney and ABC are free to put their station out in a different way if they don't want to have to succumb to any of the whims of the government. But it is a fact of the matter that this is the way that it works, and they are afforded tremendous access to homes all across America because they promise to broadcast in the public interest. And another thing that they've been getting away with for a long time is that if they are giving time to like one candidate or another, or to one subject or another, they're supposed to be presenting a balanced portrayal of that stuff, and it's quite obvious that there is no balance in television. There isn't much balance anywhere. You're going to get pretty much a lopsided viewpoint of whatever it is that you're tuning in to watch. And it's become more and more obvious in terms of broadcast television in the last several years. I mean, for decades it's been like that, but it's just become very overt. Now, where that differs for me is I'm just a commentator. I'm some dude on the internet with a camera who is pushing my show out to as many people as want to watch. I don't have the benefit of going into the homes of every single American who owns a television set, or I don't even have the potential of doing that. And so I'm under no obligation to do or say anything because the government can't shut me down for using my freedom of speech. Freedom of speech is one thing, but of course, a publicly licensed broadcaster such as ABC is subject to the rules of the FCC. And it's a totally different thing. So I hope that people understand that this is not like the government stepping in and just using its thumb to shut down ABC and force them to fire Jimmy Kimmel. I mean, things need to change. It needs to change in a very fundamental way because the type of imbalance that we see in broadcast standards has resulted into a very lopsided sort of argument that we see playing out on a regular basis. We see a lot of people who simply lack critical thinking skills because they tune into something like the news on ABC, CBS, or NBC, and it's obviously not. It's propaganda first and foremost. So either things change or they lose their broadcast license. And to be frank, I think that is just fine. So anybody who is concerned about that, you should probably get over it and look into what it is that allows ABC to broadcast in the first place. All right. Now, I had mentioned yesterday in regards to Todd Blanche's performance in a very short period of time. The man has come out the gate swinging. But I also said that Pam Bondi doesn't get much credit for the many good things that happened during her time as Attorney General. Sure, I didn't think she was that great of a public speaker. I know that a lot of people were pretty annoyed by the number of spots that she would do on Fox News. She was basically out there doing public relations when a lot of people thought she should be in the office taking care of cases. Well, the truth of the matter is that during Pam Bondi's time as Attorney General, she was responsible for quite a few major wins on behalf of the administration before the Supreme Court and in a number of other cases. She also, in my opinion, helped set the stage for Todd Blanche to come in and to immediately put feet to the pavement and begin the process of starting to indict people, arresting people, and doing what many people wish Pam Bondi would have done in the first place. Regardless of whatever you think about Pam Bondi, I just thought that it was worth mentioning the opinion of Mike Davis, who is somebody that I greatly respect. He said, actually, first, let me show you this post from LH Gray because she agrees with me. I've been asked for my opinion about Pam Bondi, so here it is. Bondi, in my opinion, was deployed as a precision instrument in a theater of institutional warfare where the Attorney General's role is less about courtroom theatrics and more about reshaping the Department of Justice's internal architecture from within a bureaucracy engineered to resist exactly that. She's 100% correct. I mean, there were a ton of people who were fired as soon as Pam Bondi came in. There was a bit of restructuring. There were definitely some positions that got changed around, and we saw things like the hiring of Harmeet Dillon, who, again, I think she's been doing great this entire time. So to mistake her 15-month tour for failure is to misunderstand the architecture of power itself. Bondi entered the DOJ in February of 2025 and after Matt Gaetz's nomination collapsed under its own weight. She inherited an agency that was riddled with holdovers, careerist prosecutors, institutional muscle memory that was tuned to the prior regime's priorities. So her mandate, executed with the cold ferocity of a Florida prosecutor who once stared down the Clintons and lived to tell it, was never to play the long game of show trials. It was to do the lethal, invisible labor. And this would explain why perhaps you didn't see Pam Bondi doing the things that you wanted her to do. I've also suggested on a number of occasions, how is it possible to even achieve the justice and the accountability that we also desperately seek when you have an entire Department of Justice that is seeking to undermine you and the efforts of the administration at every turn? Before you can even get to B, you've got to accomplish A, which is the reorganization and the cleanup. And I think that is exactly what she did. She had to purge disloyal elements. She had to redirect investigative task forces, shutter the foreign influence shops that had become political protection rackets, and most critically, build the factual scaffolding of cases that could survive judicial scrutiny once the political headwinds shifted, and that is precisely what she delivered. Under her watch, the DOJ secured historic gang and cartel takedowns, the first ever Antifa terrorism convictions, and that string of Supreme Court victories that rewrote the operational rules of engagement. Murder rates plunged to levels unseen in over a century. What she did and what I just described are not the sort of things that just happen as you stumble through your job without any sort of care or concept of what it is that you're trying to accomplish. That was a tremendous series of wins right there, and nobody ever gives Pam Bondi the credit for that. These are the metrics of someone who understood that the real war is won in the grand jury rooms and the classified briefings long before any defendant ever sees a courtroom. Now, these are the things that people often criticize her for. The public theater, like the fiasco with the Epstein files, the congressional grillings where she seemed to have a bad attitude and not want to answer questions, or when she did, she just kind of seemed childish. The slow bleed perception that President Trump's enemies weren't being prosecuted fast enough. That was the predictable noise generated by an entrenched apparatus that weaponized leaks, redactions, and procedural sabotage the moment it sensed its own exposure. Bondi absorbed that fire so the next occupant of the office would inherit dockets that were already primed, evidence chains that were already hardened, and a bureaucracy that was already bloodied and compliant. She was the breaching charge. The follow-on force, which is what we see now in Todd Blanche under acting leadership that can move with fewer Senate constraints and fresher political capital, they're the ones who get to deliver the kill shots. And I think that that's exactly what Blanche is doing right now. This is not speculation. It is the pattern of every high-stakes Trump DOJ transition. The first term chaos taught the lesson. What did we have in the first term of President Trump's first administration? We had Jeff Sessions. The Senate confirmed loyalist who survives confirmation must serve as the institutional wrecking ball. The public demands scalps. The law demands airtight cases. Bondi supplied the latter while the former was still being assembled. And for those who called her tenure incompetent, it reveals either their ignorance of how the executive branch actually functions or their desire to keep the machine broken so it can never be turned against its former masters. She was never meant to be the permanent face of the Justice Department. She was the architect who laid the rebar and poured the concrete under fire. The structure now stands and the new tenants can furnish it with indictments. That's not failure. That is lethal, disciplined statecraft. And the critics who cannot see the difference have no business commenting on power at this altitude. Now, I think that she is very, very correct. Now, going to the opinion of Mike Davis, again, somebody I believe he is somebody who knows his shit, certainly understands the law, understands the Department of Justice, and understands Washington, D.C. So he says, started under Emil Bove. Pam Bondi fired bad people, hired good people, closed bad cases, opened good ones. The shock and awe campaign brought to heel the out-of-control DOJ career staff who thought they didn't report to anyone and sabotaged the will of American voters by sabotaging their president and his team. Pam defended and won a nearly unbroken series of monumental Supreme Court cases, restoring the president's constitutional powers to deliver on his electoral mandate for all Americans. And Todd Blanche, her loyal wingman, is now finishing the job. Now, somebody else whose opinion I greatly respect is Eagle Ed Martin, the man that the mainstream media and the Panicans told you was being kicked out of the DOJ by none other than Todd Blanche, only 24 hours later for Todd and Ed to share a photograph of themselves warmly embracing from somewhere inside the DOJ. And Ed Martin, who is still working at the Department of Justice, said, "I was and am knee-deep in all of this. Below is correct." So the work is happening right now. And I think that we see this in things like Dr. David Morin's being indicted, in things like James Comey being indicted, in things like Todd Blanche continuing to announce new indictments, more of which I'm going to have for you today. Now, as a result of that indictment of Dr. Morin's, there is, of course, a renewed focus on the indictment of Dr. Anthony Fauci. Dr. Anthony Fauci had Dr. Morin's as his advisor. And of course, Dr. Morin's did not operate inside of a vacuum. Dr. Morin's was communicating on the regular with Dr. Anthony Fauci. Dr. Anthony Fauci was also covering up, obfuscating FOIA, doing his best to essentially direct and steer public opinion and knowledge about just what the hell was happening back during the pandemic. And he did so in a manner that was illegal, just like Morin's. Now, 2 weeks remain before the 5-year legal deadline on May 11th to indict Dr. Anthony Fauci for denying under oath that he funded gain-of-function experiments, which, of course, modified bat coronaviruses in the same city where the pandemic began, in Wuhan, China. Now, here's the thing. May 11th would be the 5-year statute of limitations if there was no continuing conspiratorial behaviors. However, I believe that there has been quite a few. And so I don't see May 11th as a hard cutoff date. And if I had to make a guess, I would think that the DOJ also does not see May 11th as a hard cutoff case. So we've got Morin's charged with 1 count of conspiracy, 2 counts of destruction, alteration, or falsification of records in federal investigations, 2 counts of concealment, removal, or mutilation of records, all relating to the origins of COVID-19. He faces up to 51 years in prison. So, what was one of the key factors for Anthony Fauci and David Morin's, their behavior in ensuring that they would be able to alter, obfuscate, or falsify government records? They use Gmail. Does anybody here think that Anthony Fauci 5 years ago suddenly stopped using Gmail? He was still in government for several years after May 11th. I believe undoubtedly that that man continued on with the exact same behavior that Morin's took on as his own and led to him being indicted, as we saw yesterday. I would say most people look at Anthony Fauci as the forebearer of all responsibility when it comes to the COVID-19 pandemic. And of course, Dr. Anthony Fauci was publicly speaking out all during the pandemic, doing interviews, making conversation with people as a talking head on a variety of different shows, and also making public appearances. But certainly he was continuing to email with people. And in no way do I think a world exists where Dr. Anthony Fauci suddenly stopped talking about the cover-up of what really happened and their continued efforts to massage the truth. So again, I don't think May 11th is any sort of a real hard deadline. Now, President Trump spoke in a phone interview to the New York Post on March 31st, and he said at that time that he intended to look into Dr. Anthony Fauci's status, and Republicans say that they believe acting Attorney General Todd Blanche, who, of course, is probably going to end up in the role permanently, is more than likely willing to test President Trump's assertion that President Joe Biden's presumptive auto pen pardons, which include the one for Anthony Fauci, are null and void. Personally, I think that Anthony Fauci's so-called auto pen pardon is the first place that you would want to go ahead and test something like this. And you're going to want to come at Anthony Fauci with the biggest and heaviest of those crimes that you can possibly imagine. Now, if Dr. Morins is indicted, and then Peter Daszak is also indicted for the same types of things, and then other colleagues become indicted for the same things, at what point does it become racketeering? At what point does it become a RICO case so that, of course, there is no statute of limitations? And you can just go ahead and continue on with the prosecution of everybody that you can possibly imagine. But it's Fauci that they will blame. The Oversight Project, Mike Howell, said 99% of the country have no idea who Morins is. And he's correct. Most people don't. I mean, if you've seen my show, you've seen Dr. Morins before. But he says it's Fauci that they will blame for one of the worst government catastrophes in history in America. And so the test is Fauci. The Morins indictment is great. We applaud it. But there are a lot of people out there who want to see Fauci held to account for the damage he's wrought. Now, again, it depends on what you charge Anthony Fauci with. If you charge Anthony Fauci with murder for the conduct that he engaged in during the pandemic, then, of course, there is no statute of limitations for that. But I will leave that to Todd Blanche and the good men and women at the Department of Justice. Now, Mike Howell at the Oversight Project, he actually sent some information over to the Justice Department. It was a draft indictment for David Morins last year. And he believes that the actions and advice that he sent were directly linked to the indictment that we saw yesterday. I'm sure they've done the same for Dr. Anthony Fauci, because Fauci lied about one of the most damaging events in American history. He was routinely behind a massive cover-up of the key factors, which, if people had all of the information, they could have made much better decisions. Senator Rand Paul, of course, for a long time, he's been on the bleeding edge of trying to get Anthony Fauci indicted because Fauci lied to him directly. He said, we've been going through a lot of information on this for the last year or so, and the Trump administration has been much more forthcoming than the Biden administration ever was. On Fauci's case, we think lying to Congress is one felony. We also think that destroying federal records and advising others to destroy federal records is also another felony. So I think there's opportunity there. There was a vast, both organized and disorganized conspiracy to cover up the fact that the U.S. government was funding the research that led to the pandemic. Now, President Trump also said back in December that Joe Biden was so mentally diminished that he was either unable to authorize auto pen pardons or simply that his staff did it without his knowledge, which, of course, is probably going to be the basis to test these cases legally. And Biden said to the New York Times last year that he was aware of them. There are also other things that we can point to, such as Mike Johnson's conversation with Joe Biden, where he asked Joe Biden why he would make such a terrible decision on liquid natural gas, effectively shutting down an industry and raising prices for Americans. And Joe Biden had no idea what he was talking about. I also doubt that he had any idea about many of those pardons and sentences that he commuted, certainly not the ones where he was just setting murderers and child rapists free. So to determine the validity of those pardons, you would have to indict somebody who's already been pardoned, and I think it's worth a challenge. There's some questions that have never been asked before. Is the pardon power so broad that you can pardon people for a period of time and not for a conviction, which is exemplary of what happened with Anthony Fauci and a number of other people in Joe Biden's inner circle? Because Fauci's pardon is for a decade of period for a series of unspecified crimes. And again, there's no need to give someone a pardon for such a broad swath of the brush unless you are relatively certain that they've committed multiple crimes during that time. So you'd have to determine whether Biden was aware these pardons even happened. My guess is that somebody around him is going to make him aware of which pardons he did by the time they get to trial. But what matters is whether or not he was aware at the time. And then, of course, we also have the question about the validity of the 2020 election. Because if they come forward first proving the invalidity of the 2020 election, then that, my friends, might take care of the questions that we are asking right now. Because if Joe Biden's presidency was illegitimate, as many people believe, well, then undoubtedly the decisions that he made during his so-called presidency would also then be illegitimate. That would include people he had elevated to the federal bench, perhaps Ketanji Brown Jackson at the Supreme Court, any legislation that he signed into law, certainly any executive orders, or most importantly, any of those pardons that he signed, either with his own hand or with the robo-pen. Either way, I'm pushing to find out, and I think that the only way to find out is to take it before the court, Rand Paul said. So Paul said it's also possible that Fauci committed crimes after Biden's pardon, and it might involve the question of conspiracy charges, which of course brings us into RICO status. Fauci would face up to 5 years in prison for lying to Congress. Possible conspiracy charges would take another 5 years. Neil McCabe, who is a former Trump Justice Department official and journalist, told the Post from the beginning Trump's DOJ recognized and enforced Biden's auto-pen clemencies, even the tranches of prison commutations that extended into the current administration. Trump said anything done by auto-pen was invalid. So let's see how Blanche handles it now that it's his decision. Fauci, of course, served as Joe Biden's chief medical advisor in 2021 and 2022 after he elevated himself during the early phase of the pandemic as this doctor, this man of letters, a beacon of reason, good health guidance. And even though a lot of people very quickly realized Anthony Fauci was just speaking out his ass, he didn't know what he was talking about. And you have to ask yourself, what was it that Anthony Fauci was doing all the way back in 2014 that Joe Biden or Joe Biden's autopen felt it was so necessary to go back and absolve him of? Most people didn't know who Anthony Fauci was until, 2019, 2020. Now, of course, we've looked at Anthony Fauci's career and we've seen all of the just disgusting experiments that this man was doing. But there must be something specific that there's worried about in terms of that. Now, if you want to get down and dirty, Fauci tried to elevate himself to saint status during the pandemic. We can attribute roughly 15 million deaths from 2021 and 2022 to the pandemic itself, whether that's from a particular sickness or a spectrum of illnesses, lack of medical care, perhaps, anything related to the events that took place. I'm not exactly certain. Certainly, I don't think 15 million people died from a COVID virus. I mean, that's just ridiculous. However, there were a lot of people who came in, tested, and then were immediately put on ventilators. And then, of course, their bodies shut down and they are given the status of COVID death. As we were talking about the other day, there were people who got into car accidents and they were listed as having died from COVID. There was the gentleman in the chat who his friend was riding a motorcycle, hit a horse driving down the highway. He and the horse both died. They tested his corpse after the motorcycle accident, and anybody is going to tell you that it was either the horse or the accident that killed him. Obviously, if the horse hadn't been there, he wouldn't have gotten in the accident. And yet the coroner put his cause of death down as COVID. I don't know if he had life insurance, but of course that would have made him unable for his family to cash in on life insurance, because life insurance, of course, doesn't pay out in the case of a pandemic. The whole situation is ridiculous, and I don't really know where we can draw that line between deaths because of or deaths because with or something like that. So I think Anthony Fauci's time is coming very, very quickly. Now, we've also got some new information coming from the Department of Justice, which includes this selfie of Cole Allen taken just minutes before he rushed through that checkpoint on Saturday night. And so they have just put forth a new 20-page memorandum which lays out his premeditated plot to assassinate President Trump and targeting members of the administration. So this memorandum in support of pretrial detention, which means they don't want him to get out on bond. It was filed in support of detaining him until the actual trial because of the severity of the crimes and then, of course, the premeditated nature of it. So interestingly, prosecutors updated the memo to remove any references to a Secret Service officer being hit by a bullet that was fired by Allen. That is kind of curious because, of course, in my mind, the fact that he fired at and hit a Secret Service agent, it makes him just that much more dangerous of a person. You obviously don't want to get out. So it now states that an officer observed him fire his shotgun toward the stairs leading to the ballroom and returned fire 5 times, after which the suspect was tackled and arrested. A Secret Service agent was shot during the incident, and because he was wearing a bulletproof vest, he didn't get hurt. But it's unclear now if he was shot by the suspect or perhaps accidentally shot by friendly fire. And that would be the only reason that I could see that they would take his name out or any reference to it. So shortly after 8:30 p.m., the defendant approached a U.S. Secret Service security screening checkpoint located on the terrace level. Entrances to the ballroom were located on the concourse, a floor below the screening checkpoint, down 2 open flights of stairs. Before the defendant approached the checkpoint, he discarded a long black coat that concealed a 12-gauge pump-action shotgun. The defendant then sprinted through one of the magnetometers at the checkpoint, ran in the direction of the stairs leading to the ballroom where the president and members of his family and cabinet were located. As the defendant did so, he held a shotgun in both hands in a raised position parallel to the ground as a Secret Service agent observed the defendant fire the shotgun in the direction of the stairs leading to the ballroom. The officer and others at the checkpoint heard the gunshot. Officers then a Secret Service officer drew his service weapon, fired 5 times. The defendant fell to the ground, was restrained by law enforcement, and was placed under arrest. He suffered a minor injury to his knee, but he was not shot. That's pretty good for him. At the time of the arrest, the defendant was in possession of that Mossberg with 1 spent cartridge in the barrel and 8 unfired cartridges in the magazine tube. An additional 6 unfired cartridges were attached with Velcro to the shotgun in a detachable ammunition carrier, and the defendant possessed another 10 unfired cartridges in a small leather bag. He was also in possession of a Rock Island Armory 1911 .38 caliber pistol located with 10 rounds of ammo. He also had 2 additional handgun magazines, each containing 9 rounds of ammo. California federal database records show that he legally purchased both firearms in California. Shotgun, August 17th of last year. Pistol, October 6th of 2023. He also had 2 knives, 4 daggers, multiple sheaths, multiple holsters, needle-nose pliers, wire cutters, and a Samsung cell phone. So he was ready for business. And in this image that they posted in the memorandum showing him in his hotel room, you can see, all of his weaponry and accoutrement attached to his person. So making it pretty obvious that he is the guy, and this was obviously his plan. So very, very good to see that the DOJ is working on their cases. Now, I'd like to show you just one more thing about Cole Allen. This is really strange. Just about probably as strange as the time travel Butler connection that we had from last week. Okay, so it turns out that Cole Allen had created an indie game that is still available online, and we're going to show you here in just a second, and it's called Hamster Purgatory. Now, the content of Hamster Purgatory is not really something you can play. It's more like something that you witness. And there are a series of characters in Hamster Purgatory that seem to be driven by large language model AIs. So these are 4 characters who are having a conversation inside of a room, and they're talking about things like mind control, the Illuminati, scientists experimenting on Americans. There's a lot of really weird stuff that they're talking about there. And are we sure they aren't really gerbils? Well, they're called hamsters, so I don't know. You don't really see them, but you just hear them talking about it. But here's the thing. Many people, and the people who initially found this game, are suggesting that this is Cole Allen's true manifesto. Now, Who knows, right? I mean, he hasn't commented on it, but the work has been done to connect this game and this website to Cole Allen because he used to have a Steam account, and the game was actually available in a version you could download on Steam. And he also had his own profile where you could see the games that he was playing. You know, I mean, it's like you can go and follow me on Steam and you can see the games that I'm playing. So again, you pull up the website, they're talking about government mind control, magnetized protein filaments syncing with the Earth's magnetic fields, the moon landing, how NASA is a psyop, scientists experimenting on Americans, the New World Order. So I'm going to unmute this, and we're just going to watch it for a minute, and you can see how odd it is.
Barks?
The time has come, my sweet, unsuspecting world.
You'll pay for your sinister plans to exploit and harm those innocent hamsters.
The hamsters are merely pawns in the larger game of hamster control, a front for the Illuminati's sinister plan to harness the collective energy of the rodent population to power their mind control devices.
Yes, the hamsters, they're not pets. They're batteries. And the Illuminati? They've been grooming us for decades.
The hamsters are actually micro-miniaturized nuclear reactors disguised as rodents, silently powering global infrastructure while the Illuminati orchestrate history from beneath the surface of mainstream media and academia.
So it's actually kind of based, the things they're talking about. So you've got with a cat girl right here. That's like, how do I even describe this? It's like an aesthetic getup, like that young people wear when they stream, both boys and girls. They will kind of make themselves look like anime Japanese cats and then get on stream. Then you've got the theorist, which is like a typical conspiracy theorist. It's a guy, looks a little bit like me without a beard, bad teeth and glasses, and he's wearing a tinfoil hat. And then you've got the scientist, which is the one who's driving all of the experimentation. And then you've got Karen over here with a Karen haircut. And it kind of does look like Roblox. It's very simple. You can move around like this, but that's about it. And I wish that I could have gotten the downloaded version of it before it was taken down by Steam. But they'll just sit here and continue to talk. And it is kind of entertaining. But yeah, they'll be talking about the hamsters and how the hamsters are being experimented on and how it is cruel and how the goals of the scientists and the government to control the minds of hamsters was essentially an experiment to get into the minds of average, everyday human beings. So very, very odd. And this website is hamsterpurgatory.com. This will undoubtedly remain online until Cole Allen's money runs out or until his domain registration runs out. Yeah, it's not good graphics. It's definitely not something you can really play. It's just kind of more like an interactive experience. And the fact that it's being run by these AIs, which are just going to continue to talk to each other until the registration runs out, it's fascinating. It makes me think about, you know, what were his ultimate plans for this, and you know, how far was he looking to take it. Anyways, that's really all there is to it. All right, now we're going to continue talking about the administration and the DOJ. I just learned this earlier today. You know, Nicole Wallace from the news, MS Now. Well, I had known that Nicole Wallace was previously employed in the U.S. government, but Tony Saruga says that she was actually recruited by the Central Intelligence Agency while she was a student at Berkeley. George H.W. Bush, former director of the CIA, former president of the United States, a one-termer like Jimmy Carter, was her unofficial mentor. And she also served as Governor Jeb Bush's press secretary down here in Florida, and then became the communications director for the Florida State Technology Office in 2000. Now, interestingly, she was also working on the 2000 Florida election count, which delivered George W. Bush as the president. You all remember the hanging chads. I remember going to sleep in 2000 and they had declared Al Gore the winner. And then I woke up in the morning and the paper is on my front doorstep and it says that George W. is the winner. I don't know that either one of them would have been better than the other. I think that they were both Manchurian candidates, so to speak. But she also went on to work inside the George W. Bush White House in various positions. She was also a senior advisor for the John McCain 2008 presidential campaign. And then later, this is the juicy part, she was tasked by the CIA to get hired at the Trump White House. Now, she failed in that endeavor. She was completely rejected by the Trump administration, and she was allegedly furious about it. She still is today. She's never gotten over the fact that the administration has completely rebuked her and that she could not do what the CIA wanted her to do, which in a way explains why she hates the administration so much. And of course, in this clip, she is discussing the indictment about James Comey.
So what we have today, this revived attempt to target Jim Comey by, we should keep in mind, Acting Attorney General Todd Blanche, is coming at an important time for Acting Attorney General Todd Blanche.
Well, it's more than just an important time for Acting Attorney General Todd Blanche. It's also a formative time in the investigation of former CIA Director John Brennan, which, of course, is somebody that Nicole Wallace would be well acquainted with, not only because she's had him on her program, she's interviewed him on more than one occasion, but of course, you know, she would have also been at the CIA and perhaps having direct contact with him. So for the indictment against James Comey to be coming in the midst of the ongoing investigation into former CIA Director John Brennan, it could spell drastic times for Brennan because, of course, James Comey was also directly involved in the overarching grand conspiracy to destroy President Trump. And who knows, maybe Nicole Wallace can be brought in on this as well.
Weeks after Pam Bondi was fired, in some part, perhaps large part, for her failures in carrying out Donald Trump's retribution agenda.
And of course, as we've well established, this is not a retribution agenda. This is a great equalizing of justice in the United States of America. For many years, the people that are now being scrutinized by the Department of Justice were the people who were doing the scrutinizing of innocent people prior to that. They were the people who were using the mechanisms of power in the United States to destroy people who they disagreed with politically, who were their ideological rivals.
But it's not clear what new evidence, if any, exists or that Blanche has uncovered to make this case successful now.
Well, of course, that evidence is not clear yet. And this is also one place where I think a lot of people in the public get frustrated, but of course, even more the deep state get frustrated by as well. Because in that former regime that I was just describing, evidence would leak to the public all the time. The deep state would do whatever it could to poison the people they were attempting to take down in the minds of the general public, because even if they were unsuccessful in a legal sense, they could still destroy someone reputationally, and they could make their lives as difficult to live as possible, meaning that not only would people on the outside, through the continued brainwashing and programming of the mainstream media, come to believe in someone's guilt, but it could also make them unemployable in the future. It could quite literally make their lives not worth living.
Today's news of Comey's indictment does, though, feel like a quintessential Trump news cycle. One crisis wiped off the front page by another crisis. But this breaking news is part of the very same slow-motion collision that we've been covering for a decade now between...
Yes, the collision that you've been covering for a decade that you yourself have been directly involved in creating, Nicole Wallace. Now, early this morning on CBS Morning, Todd Blanche appeared and was interviewed for nearly 5 minutes. And I'm just going to play the entire thing. I will stop and do some commentary in the midst of it. But Todd Blanche's performance in this interview is impeccable. And I really want it to be driven home to everybody. I want it to sink in the level of calm and precision that Todd Blanche displays when encountering those in the mainstream media who seek to perhaps destroy any hope that we may have of seeing justice for somebody like James Comey. Todd Blanche is a consummate professional. I said yesterday he was a secret assassin, and I still stand by that.
Do you have proof that the former FBI director knowingly and willfully threatened the life of the president?
A grand jury indicted Mr. Comey yesterday. Grand juries hear evidence. That evidence is not something that anybody can talk about today. But when you talk about whether proof exists, the proof that we have is in the fact that the grand jury returned an indictment. Remember, that is not the Department of Justice charging James Comey with a crime. That is a grand jury returning a 2-count indictment.
Let's do a comparison.
Yeah, let me just give you a quick primer on how the judicial system works, how the legal system works in the United States of America. They keep wanting to pin Todd Blanche and President Trump as having done this to James Comey. But it wasn't them that did it. All they did was present the evidence that, yes, we have not been given access to yet because the trial hasn't happened. And it's only fair that that information will be presented in a court of law. It's not President Trump that is bringing retribution. It's the people. It is a jury of Jim Comey's peers who examined the evidence the DOJ was able to put together, mind you, over the last year. All right, this has been an ongoing investigation, and they gained access to Comey's communications long ago. I would suggest that he's also been under surveillance in one form or another. And as a result of that, we now have the decision that was announced a couple of days ago.
In contrast, Mr. Blanche, in 2022, someone well known in right-wing circles, Zak Paine, posted on X 8646. He did not take it down. He did not apologize. Mr. Comey has done both of those things. The Biden Justice Department never prosecuted him. By the standard of that grand jury, Zak Paine should face charges as well. Will the Justice Department pursue that case? Because they sound very similar.
That's just completely not true. That's not how a grand jury does its work. They don't just look at a single image and then say, okay, yes, we'll indict, or okay, no, we won't indict. They do an investigation. This conduct took place in May of last year, May 15th. It has been almost a year. I assure you, the FBI, the Secret Service, and the U.S. Attorney's Office have not been sitting around doing nothing. They have been investigating. I have no idea whether there was an investigation into the other times that post has been made and whether that investigation yielded different results. This investigation that we undertook resulted in a 2-count indictment. So you cannot compare, well, what happened last time, what happened this time. Every investigation is different. You know that. The American people know that. A lot of factors go into whether somebody should or should not be charged. The mere fact that there's a similar photo posted or a similar statement made, that's true. Every day there's comments made about President Trump, threats made against President Trump. Every one of those are not indicted. It depends on the facts of every case.
Now, and this is another thing the mainstream media loves to do, painting these broad brushstrokes and making these false equivalencies between very different situations. But because they have the tremendous audience that they do, CBS News being one of those publicly funded broadcast stations that I mentioned earlier, publicly funded in terms of the broadcast spectrum that they're allowed to use, they have the ability to enter this information directly into the minds of Americans all around the country. And if they can successfully convince them that A is the same as B, well, then they might be able to draw some sort of sympathy for James Comey. But Todd Blanche, again, giving the perfect answer. These are two very different circumstances, and the circumstances which led to the indictment of James Comey are undoubtedly very different to a potential investigation into somebody like Zak Paine, who has also publicly commented on this, his willingness to participate with the DOJ if it becomes necessary.
Mr. Blanche, you lived this history much more than I did, but I'm going to paraphrase what you said about the hush money case that was brought in New York. You said at the time, supposedly serious people were bringing unserious charges and warping the language and the facts and the law because there was a political imperative beyond that. Are you telling the American people this morning that this is a serious case and this is a serious set of charges and that laws and facts are not being warped to carry out a political agenda?
Look at the indictment. That's not for me to decide. That's for the American people to decide. And if anybody in this country thinks, especially what happened over the past couple years with respect to President Trump, that it is okay for anybody to threaten the President of the United States, that it is okay to threaten the President of the United States and then have the media or others say, well, that's not serious, then we have a bigger problem than I even imagined in this country. Of course it's serious when you threaten the President of the United States, and anybody that tries to put forward some narrative that this is just about seashells or something to the contrary is missing the point. You cannot threaten the President of the United States. That's not my decision. That's Congress's decision in a law that they passed. And so, yes, of course this is a serious case.
And there it gets to the heart of it, because this is not simply because President Trump is demanding it. This is well established. This is a law that was written long ago. And if the law is going to mean anything, and if we're going to show the people of the United States that the type of behavior Todd Blanche says he's afraid might exist, because it does. It's been well established for a very long time that the permissibility of threatening the life of President Trump is totally cool, as long as you have the right political beliefs. And if we don't address that, if we don't show through the prosecution of somebody like James Comey that this is not going to be tolerated regardless of who you are politically, well, then the law means absolutely nothing. And the same goes for so many other things. We have two very different systems of justice here in the United States. And traditionally, somebody like James Comey, they get a free ride, okay? They are not held to any sort of terms of responsibility like somebody like you and I would.
Mr. Blanche, did the President of the United States in any way direct you to pursue this matter?
Of course not. Absolutely, positively not. And there's no suggestion that that's the case that happened. And the fact that we're doing our work, this is not something that just happened the past couple of weeks. This is something that has been investigated for nearly a year now. And the results of that investigation is a grand jury returned an indictment.
Critics of you and this administration, Mr. Blanche, have suggested this is an audition to become the nominee to be Attorney General, is it?
I don't even know what that means. We work hard every single day. The Department of Justice returns over 100 indictments across this country every single day, making this country safe. And so this narrative, this idea out there that somehow I'm auditioning, I've worked with President Trump for many, many years. I don't audition for this job. I've been the Deputy Attorney General for over a year. Okay, this is not an audition.
This is so perfect. Obviously, that is a very stupid question. Of course, Todd Blanche doesn't have to interview for anything. He was given the Deputy Attorney General position because of his work with President Trump, his proximity, President Trump's knowledge and faith in his ability to not only perform the duties that would be necessary in that position, but also, of course, his character, his adherence to the law, his belief in the mission, and, of course, his desire to fix the things that are wrong, not only at the Department of Justice, but also around the country. So, yeah, what a dumb question coming from this blowhard.
And you are confident this case will result in a conviction?
I do not comment on convictions, and no prosecutor ever should. What I'm confident about is that there's been a 2-count indictment returned, and Mr. Comey will get his day in court.
Boom. Blow it out your ass. Perfect interview. Perfect interview. Now, let's talk about some of the other cases that have been brought. Would this gentleman on CBS have suggested that any of these other cases were merely attempts for the Attorney General to audition or the Deputy Attorney General to audition, or that they were simply done as political currency for the current administration? In 2015, under Barack Obama, Brandon Correa in Rochester, New York, was sentenced to 18 months in prison for posting threats on Twitter, including writing, "I'm coming to watch you die," and telling agents that Obama was evil and that he had to die. And you can go see that at justice.gov. Jerry Blanchard, 2008-2009, he was sentenced to 1 year and 1 day in prison, plus fines and supervised release for making verbal threats at a Waffle House, claiming that Obama was the Antichrist and offering to take him out. Brian Dutcher in Wisconsin in 2016, he was sentenced to 3 years in prison for telling a security guard that he planned to shoot Obama during a speech. Stephen J. Taubert in Syracuse, New York, 2019. He was convicted by jury and sentenced to 4 years for making racist death threats against Obama and Representative Maxine Waters via phone. Another man by the name of Gavin Friedman in Austin, Texas, 2017. He was sentenced to over 5 years for mailing letters threatening to kill Obama and to blow up the White House. There was also Richard Jeremy Ware, who received 5 years in prison for making threats against Obama, and then later he got additional time for making threats against Trump while he was in prison. So, like Todd Blanche said, these things occur all the time, and I would sincerely doubt that these 5 or 6 instances that I just read to you are the only times that they've happened over the last several years. Now, one more clip of Todd Blanche. This is at the press conference earlier today with the new director of the ATF. And we'll talk about why they had a press conference a little bit later on. But of course, somebody asked him once again about the potential for others to be criminally charged for making similar statements. All right. And you can't hear this guy speaking, but he says, is it the DOJ's position that anybody who posts 8647 is subject to potential investigation and criminal charges?
Look, every case is different. Every threats case is different. And so that means that there can, what does that mean? That means that the nature of the threat, the person who makes the threat, and then the investigation around the threat. And so you cannot, it would be ill-advised for anybody to compare a particular statement to another statement that appears similar when there's been a thorough investigation. Nobody in this room has any idea what happened during a grand jury investigation between May 15th and yesterday. And so that's reflective of the work that the FBI, the Secret Service, U.S. Attorney's Office in the Eastern District of North Carolina did. And so I mean, you know that every time that's posted, that number is posted, you know that every time there is a threat against the president, it doesn't necessarily lead to an indictment. It depends. It depends on the investigation. It depends on all kinds of factors. And so it's not, people should be very wary of threatening the life of President Trump, because that is a crime. Full stop. Okay? Now, whether it's a crime that we will ultimately charge, depending on, you mentioned the First Amendment, sure, or other investigative steps or things that we learn or things that we uncover from talking to witnesses, reviewing evidence. So I on the one hand, the fact that people are questioning why we would be, that there should be no doubt you cannot threaten the life of the President of the United States. Can't do it, okay? And so beyond that, I'm not going to comment. We've had an indictment returned by a grand jury in North Carolina. I think my understanding is Mr. Comey appeared in court in Virginia today. I'm not sure the schedule beyond that. I haven't caught up to folks about that. But he will be given every single right, every single opportunity to defend his case in court. And the U.S. Attorney's Office should be given every single right to do exactly what they have a right to do as well.
Okay, which is why you can't say anything more than what is currently being said. Now, a couple of thank yous over here on Rumble. Thank you again to It's Tony Man. Thank you to Principled Enigma, who says, LH Gray is right. What a powerful statement. Like I said, or like I tried to say the other day, she's the one who managed the investigations that turned into indictments that Blanche is now working on. Agreed? Also, Biden and Obama's terms were the country's pregnancy. The baby is 47. And then when you are right and within the context of humility, confidently know it. You speak with an authority that goes beyond the natural. Integrity is an attribute that only God possesses. God is truth. The only thing we can do is submit to his mirrors. Thank you. And then Sabrado says, sent a DM on X, Tina Peters news. I was actually going to bring some information about Tina Peters. I don't see. What's your name on X? Because I'm not, I could have sworn that I followed you on X, and I don't see anything from you on X. Okay. Yeah, I'm not seeing anything from you, Saberdo, unless your name is something. Oh, yes. No. Okay, I see who you are now. Okay. So, yes, I was actually going to report on this. Thank you for that. All right. So, thank you again to Saberdo. Okay. So, this next piece is in regards to James Comey finally being arrested. He surrendered himself to authorities earlier this morning at a federal courthouse in Alexandria, Virginia. Of course, that is the Eastern District of Virginia. He was taken into custody. I would assume that a mugshot was taken. That hasn't been released to the public yet. But now he's going to have to travel to North Carolina because that's the jurisdiction under which he is facing these multiple felonies. But the talking heads at CNN were pretty much freaking out all day because the DOJ is not playing.
Well, Comey is in the courtroom, and the hearing is starting now, the very first appearance of this former FBI director accused of threatening the president's life with that post on
threatening the president's life.
Instagram a year ago with seashells in the sand. This is the first hearing that will happen in this courthouse, the Eastern District of Virginia, but this is a case that's charged in North Carolina because that's where that beach photo was taken. This first appearance, Comey now being under arrest in the courtroom. He's going to be before a
So beautiful. So beautiful to see them completely melting down as a result of this happening. Now, I also wanted to show this because Catherine Herridge makes a point that I made yesterday. Although the indictment itself against Comey might appear to be thin, and for many people, it appears to be something that really they're like, wow, this is what he's being prosecuted for. But as I said yesterday, it's the type of prosecution that is just severe enough that it opens the door to everything else that they may want to gain access to Comey for. Comey is not going to want to spend the next 20 years in prison. Comey is definitely going to want to save his own skin. During the course of the investigation, and Todd Blanche, I believe, hinted at it by saying that you have no idea what we presented to the grand jury. Undoubtedly, they presented Jim Comey's own communications to the jury. And again, the timing of this indictment comes in the midst of the ongoing investigation into John Brennan. Now, this is very close to having an indictment or a series of indictments announced for him as well. And considering that Brennan was that driving force behind the Russia collusion narrative, and Comey was standing at his side, also driving forward the Russia collusion narrative, running the FBI as his own private investigative agency, he is undoubtedly going to be the exact type of person that the DOJ will want to put pressure on to perhaps lessen the sentence and spend less than the next 2 decades in prison. Now, MS Now suggests part of this is to harass, to try to hurt individuals reputationally, professionally, and financially. I think that's hilarious because, again, that is exactly what the old DOJ and FBI were doing when they were going after innocent people, regardless of whatever they were attempting to charge them with, whatever they were attempting to use to put them in prison. We have people in government who seem to be so mean-spirited, they tried to hurt individuals, people, family, and others. They are, again, engaging in just the most obvious form of projection that you possibly can. And in James Comey's communication with that discovery, they're going to be looking at his emails. They're going to be looking at his text messages. They're going to be looking at communications that he was making with associates, with people in government, with the people at his publisher, with family members, with his close associates in the media. All of these things are going to point towards James Comey's state of mind and his intent and his knowledge of the usage of that coded phrase 8647. Now, James Comey, of course, is going to suggest that it was innocent, it was political speech, that it was not associated with any violence, but I think that the fact that the grand jury brought back that indictment so quickly, it points directly to the fact that James Comey's own communications are going to directly refute that fact. Here's the other thing. I mentioned yesterday that there was a section about forfeiture in James Comey's indictment. I thought that was very interesting, especially considering the fact that right around the time that James Comey posted this image on Instagram, he was about to have a book published. At the time that book was published, we talked about it a little bit. It was about the use of coded messages to create political violence, which is stunningly exactly what James Comey was attempting to do with the publishing of that 8647 Instagram post. He was writing from the perspective of a prosecutor that was going after a right-wing radio host, podcaster, who was using language that was claimed to be First Amendment protected speech, but was in fact designed to inflame his listeners into going out and committing acts of political violence. It's, again, a case of projection. It is exactly what James Comey did, and the behavior that he engaged in mirrored his book so effectively. Undoubtedly, people who supported him went out and bought that book thinking, well, geez, I'm going to support James Comey because the government's coming after him. So I think that that entire forfeiture section is entirely related to the publication of James Comey's book and the profits that he made off of it. So really looking forward to seeing where this goes and how quickly we get James Comey into court, whether or not he's even going to have a trial. If James Comey flips, if James Comey becomes a cooperating witness in the grand conspiracy investigation, all bets are off, because James Comey has the goods on so many people, not just Obama, not just Susan Rice, not just Lisa Monaco, not just Joe Biden, not just John Brennan, not just Jim Clapper. I mean, everybody who was surrounding Obama at that time. And does anybody here think James Comey could successfully do 20 years in prison? Is there anybody here who doubts that he might become the next on the Arkansas list before he gets an opportunity to even make it through? Principled Enigma also said that was submit to being his mirrors. What I'm suggesting is that we are the mirrors of his character on earth. Yes, I understood. All right, now let me also say thank you very much to Hogleg71 for the can, Sean Joe for 2 cans, Moonbaby who says screw Kimmel, he's a POS, yes he is. Thank you to Sean Joe for 1, 2, 3, 4 cookies. Thank you to Filter Dog for a can. Guinea pigs are much better pets, very social. I always thought that hamsters were cuter. Sean Joe, thank you for the cookie. Filter Dog, thank you for the cookie. Fox News Media Vice President Jason Hermé has been terminated, largely due to OMG. I haven't even talked about this, but basically they did a honeypot operation on him. He was caught on camera saying that he was charging like $4,000 nights out at like stripper clubs and a number of other unsavory things. And yeah, he's gone. Filter Dog also says Jason has been terminated. The comments he made during a personal outing grossly misrepresented his position at Fox Weather and within the larger company. Expense reports are subject to a sophisticated review and auditing process, and his wildly bizarre claims were immediate. The DOJ did not okay, that's a different one. Sean Joe, thank you for the cookie. Filter Dog, the DOJ did not indict Comey solely on the basis of the arrangement of the seashells. They indicted him based on what they likely found on his phone and other evidence which implicates him. Yes, of course. And that goes into what I was saying in regards to the evidence that was presented to the grand jury. All right. Now, before we continue with the next section of our program, I have a special message from our friends on Rumble. You guys, they can cancel your accounts. They can shut off your cards. They can lock you out of your money overnight because banks don't protect you. They control you. When they've got access to your money, they can do whatever they want to you. That's why real financial freedom starts with ownership. So introducing the Rumble wallet. It is a wallet where you can buy not just digital currency like Bitcoin and Tether. You can also own Tether Gold, which is real gold on the blockchain. And through Tether Gold, you get direct ownership of actual physical gold bars. Each one of those is fully allocated, verifiable by serial number, purity, and weight. It's not paper gold. It's not an IOU. It's real gold without bank vaults, storage fees, or gatekeepers. So you can buy, sell, or move it 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, even when traditional gold markets are closed. And if you want, coolest of all, you can actually trade in Tether Gold to be redeemed for physical gold bars, which is super powerful. Now, when you want to support creators on Rumble, you can also tip them using the Rumble wallet directly. It's peer-to-peer and outside the banking system. So there's no permission necessary. There's no middlemen to get involved or take a cut off the top. There's no cancel button. It's your wallet permanently forever. So you can use that QR code on screen. Go to wallet.rumble.com or go to the App Store on your device. Thank you very much to Rumble and Rumble Wallet. Appreciate it. Okay, now the next portion of our program, again, in keeping in line with the public conversation of James Comey's indictment, Alina Habba commented earlier today during her appearance, talking about the validity of the indictment and teasing additional indictments coming for other co-conspirators in the Russiagate grand conspiracy.
So why should anyone believe this pattern of targeting Trump's enemies is about justice and not revenge?
If you think that the Russian collusion hoax, if you think that the things that we've now seen evidence of in this Department of Justice aren't real, I'd just tell you to sit tight because things are coming. Because what they did was weaponized. I don't want to hear about weaponization because the reason you all know who I am is because of weaponization. I sat through targeting people saying we're going to get Trump. And then a Hillary Clinton appointed judge sanctioned me for suing Hillary Clinton. By the way, I'm proud of that. Well, I'm proud of what I did.
Actually,
because it was the right thing to do.
let me get Alyssa in here. Let me get Alyssa. So why should any?
It was actually a Bill Clinton appointed judge, but the sentiment is exactly the same. The weaponization has always come from the other side. And now that justice is pointing in the opposite direction, people simply just don't know how to react. Now, President Trump, during an event in the Oval Office, was also asked earlier today about this indictment of James Comey. Caitlin Collins, another brain-dead, TDS-suffering, worm skull-filled moron from CNN, is the one asking the question. Let's hear from President Trump.
We were talking about how busy you were this morning. James Comey was in court. He self-surrendered. He's now been charged a second time, this time over a social media post with seashells that said 8647. Do you really think that he was endangering your life or threatening your life with that?
Well, if anybody knows anything about crime, they know 86. You know what 86? It's a mob term for kill him. You know? You ever see the movies? 86 him. The mobster says to one of his wonderful associates, 86 him. That means kill him. It's, I think of it as a mob term. I don't know, people think of it as something having to do with disappearing, but the mob uses that term to say.
I don't know, Gizmo, I've never seen her with her skirt off.
When they want to kill somebody, they say, 86, the son of a gun. I'm trying to keep the language nice and clear. They don't use that term, son of a gun. They use another term. But that's a mob term for kill him. Yeah.
But do you really think your life was in danger?
Probably. I don't know. You know, based on what I'm seeing out there, yeah. The people like Comey have created tremendous danger, I think, for politicians and others. Comey is a dirty cop. He's a very dirty cop. He cheated on the elections. He tried to help Hillary Clinton, as you know. He dismissed a lot of things that he should have proceeded with. I wasn't involved, but he should have proceeded with. No, he's a dirty cop. He's a crooked man.
He is a dirty cop. As the former director of the FBI, James Comey was well aware of exactly what that would mean. And so, again, a jury of his peers will sort out based upon the full presentation of the evidence. And that is, of course, only if James Comey does not turn state's evidence. Now, continuing, we've also gotten an announcement in the case of the assault on Savannah Hernandez from Minnesota. The entirety of that family that attacked her, the Ostrucco family, all three of them have now been federally indicted. The mother, the father, and the daughter. Savannah, well, first of all, it came out earlier today. It was a leak that two of them, at least, had been indicted. And then shortly before I went live, the DOJ announced all three indictments. Savannah said, "I am extremely grateful to the DOJ and the FBI for how swiftly they handled this case. I have been assaulted by violent left-wing activists multiple times, and there's never been a response. So to see the FBI and the justice system utilized to fight back against left-wing violence is extremely appreciated." Today, Christopher, Diana, and Paige Ostrucco were indicted by a grand jury for allegedly assaulting journalist and Turning Point USA contributor Savannah Hernandez. while she was lawfully reporting on anti-ICE protests outside a federal building in St. Paul, said Acting Attorney General Todd Blanche. Hernandez was allegedly surrounded, physically assaulted, and shoved to the ground simply because she was identified by the defendants as a conservative journalist. That is not peaceful protest. These deplorable actions, as charged in the indictment, will not be tolerated in America, and this Department of Justice will always punish unhinged acts of political violence. Thank you so much, Acting Attorney General Todd Blanche. Now, in case you haven't seen this, Savannah Hernandez was outside of the ICE facility in Minneapolis. She was simply reporting. She was surrounded by a group of left-wing lunatics, and the organizers who had shown up to protest confirmed that they brought over 600 sex toys, which basically dildos they were waving around, and they called it the National F ICE Day. They also had, of course, signs that read, "Get the F out ICE. ICE has no place here. F ICE," and "Dementia Malignant Narcissist President," which again is just another case of projection that is hilariously ironic. So they lined up with these sex toys. Savannah Hernandez was reporting live at the Whipple building, and she was physically assaulted by a number of people. I was unsurprised to see these three become the recipients of indictments. I was hoping that the woke farmer was also going to be indicted, but perhaps they didn't have video of that one happening. We're not going to watch the video again, but there are many different angles that exist out there online if you haven't seen it. Savannah was very obviously physically assaulted by every member of this family. I don't know if they've been arrested yet or if they've surrendered themselves, but undoubtedly they will very soon. All right. Now, we also have an update in the Feeding Our Future case. Now, Amy Bach, who was the head of the NGO that essentially led and orchestrated the Feeding Our Future scam, has just been accused by the Department of Justice of illegally passing evidence from her case out to members of the mainstream media in an attempt to, I guess, win her some sympathy points or something like that. It's a really stupid thing to do because she's about to be sentenced, and her sentence is probably going to be the worst out of anybody because, again, she really orchestrated the whole thing.
A really weird development in the case of Amy Bach, the former executive director of Feeding Our Future, awaiting her sentencing hearing next month for the $300 million fraud scheme. A new filing by the prosecution accuses Bach of trying to influence reporters from her jail cell by having her son create a fake name and email address and sending the press hundreds of pages of documents she wasn't allowed to share.
Now, just in case anybody here ever finds themselves in any sort of legal jeopardy, I want to be very clear. There is no such thing as privacy when you're behind bars. And there is supposed to be privacy when having privileged conversations with your legal counsel, but even then, I wouldn't trust anybody. If you talk to somebody on the phone, that phone call is being monitored. If you send somebody mail, that mail is being monitored. If you give your family or your friends instructions on how to behave or how to structure a story or how to speak to the media, all of those communications are being monitored. This person has done herself a real disservice.
Prosecutors say Bach instructed her college-age son to go into her Dropbox account and download files, strip off the court exhibit stickers, and email them out under the fake name Daisy Hill. I have received emails from Daisy Hill. I haven't reported anything from it as the materials have mostly been redundant emails and information that I've seen before. But Bach's son allegedly sent the Star Tribune much more, including more than 300 FBI witness interview reports, protected materials that were only supposed to be used in Bach's criminal case. And on a recent jail call, Bach claimed her own defense attorney and the Star Tribune's editor were coordinating on when to publish to time the story for maximum impact before her sentencing. The Star Tribune has published no such article. The judge has called a hearing this Thursday to address those issues. Bach's sentencing is in late May. I'm Lou Bergoose. Follow.
So she's probably going to have some extra time tacked on. All right. Now, other wonderful news that we learned early this morning, the Supreme Court has decided in favor of Louisiana, declaring their newly drawn congressional map as unconstitutional. Now, it's interesting. You've got certain factions within Louisiana who were seeking to create these racially gerrymandered districts, fighting against others within the state government of Louisiana who said that those districts, as drawn, were unconstitutional, and they were making sure that they would not be able to stick around. This was another majority 6-3 decision with the dissenting opinions coming from Sotomayor, Kagan, and Jackson. I believe only Sotomayor wrote the dissent. The state versus Philip Calais, and there's another related case, Press Robinson versus Philip Calais, all stem from the Democrat lawmakers caving to left-wing judges and creating a second majority-minority congressional district in the state of Louisiana. So while the ruling does not overturn the Voting Rights Act or Section 2, it is likely to narrow how minority representation influences multiple states' congressional maps, and that's going to trigger a new wave of legal challenges over congressional boundaries. And it's already begun to have a series of ripple effects that we'll examine in just a moment. So the Supreme Court has just limited the scope of a key Voting Rights Act provision. That provision restricts how states are able to draw districts that will affect minority voters. Essentially, it constrains the state's use of race as a factor when drawing congressional maps before the 2026 midterms, which means that the districts are going to be redrawn, and it will have an effect on who you can vote for in the 2026 midterm in just a few months. So the 6-3 ruling has shown that Louisiana's newly redrawn map, which created a second majority black district, is in fact an illegal racial gerrymander. So the justices have acknowledged that compliance with the Voting Rights Act can be a compelling interest for states. It's now ruled that it did not require Louisiana to create the new map with the second majority black district. So compliance with Section 2 of the Voting Rights Act, as properly construed, can provide such a reason, Alito said in his majority decision. But correctly understood, Section 2 does not impose liability at odds with the Constitution, and so it should not have imposed liability on Louisiana for that 2022 map. Compliance with Section 2 thus could not justify the state's use of race-based redistricting in this instance. So effectively, using racial demographics as a factor in the creation of congressional districts is concluded to be unconstitutional. And so therefore, any racially gerrymandered districts in any state throughout America will either be redrawn or there will be a battle in the courts to force them to be redrawn. Now, in that same event earlier today, President Trump was asked about this Supreme Court decision, and he had this to say.
Mr. President, I want to go back to the Supreme Court ruling on the Voting Rights Act. I know you said you haven't seen it.
When did it come out? Just now?
No, it came out this morning, but basically very much narrows the Voting Rights Act.
Was it considered a win for who?
A win for Republicans.
I love it. This is a very good. We can end this news conference right now. I want to read it.
My question
Wow.
for you, Mr. President, is that some Republican governors have not responded in terms of what they're going to do. I guess early voting, for example, in Louisiana.
Republican governors, what?
Republican governors.
What about it?
Early voting begins Saturday there, for instance. Should they redraw the map in the next couple of
I would. I mean, it depends. I mean, some states don't need to redraw, and some do. I mean, I know what the concept of the ruling. I just haven't seen the result. Yeah, I would say generally I would think that they would want to do it. Some are greatly helped, and some, it didn't make much difference. Yeah, I would say they would do that. They have time to do it. Yeah, please.
Do it. Do it. Do it. And in states like Florida, they've already begun to do it. Now, how much of an effect will this have on the balance of Congress? Now, there have been a number of different metrics we've looked at, including, redrawing congressional boundaries, retaking the census to include only American citizens and people who actually can vote, and a series of other actions. But now, based upon this decision, we can reliably state that 12 seats are now up for grabs. So you take a look at the current maps. Now, these maps on the left were all based on congressional districts that were built around racial demographics to give black voters a majority representation in these districts. Now, considering the fact that the Supreme Court has explicitly stated that this is an unconstitutional metric by which to create these congressional districts, all of these districts now are likely to be redrawn. So in Louisiana, you're going to lose several Democrat seats. In fact, if we just look at the entire Southeast, we're talking about a rebalancing of 12 seats, 12 Democrat seats, instead becoming 12 Republican seats, because the districts will be redrawn in such a way that they're based on the naturally occurring boundaries of these areas, and no longer instead will it be necessary to do it based upon racial makeup, because that is not correct. So we already see this beginning to take shape in Alabama. The Attorney General of Alabama has published this letter suggesting that they're going to act to do exactly what I just suggested as soon as possible. So the Attorney General, Steve Marshall, celebrated the U.S. Supreme Court's decision today in Louisiana versus Calais, holding that Section 2 of the Voting Rights Act and the 14th and 15th Amendments of the U.S. Constitution neither require nor allow states to use race to draw voting districts, either to create additional minority-majority districts or to intentionally dilute the vote of minority users. States must use race-neutral considerations when crafting districts. The Supreme Court has spoken. States cannot be forced to gerrymander by race. Louisiana versus Calais is a watershed moment. The court has shut the door on vote dilution claims that use racial data to disguise what are really partisan disputes. Alabama has been fighting the battle for many years, and today the Supreme Court confirmed our long-held argument that states must not use race either to help or harm particular voters when drawing voting districts. The court rightly acknowledged that the South has made extraordinary progress and that the laws designed for a different era do not reflect the present reality. As we act too quickly as possible, apply this ruling to Alabama's redistricting efforts and ensure that our congressional maps reflect the will of the people, not a racial quota system that Constitution forbids, Attorney General Steve Marshall said. The Supreme Court's decision arises from those two lawsuits I mentioned earlier. In 2022, after the state redrew its congressional districts following the 2020 census, a federal judge held that the map likely violated Section 2 of the Voting Rights Act because it did not include an additional majority black district. When the state drew a map, however, a separate federal court held that the map violated the Equal Protection Clause of the 14th Amendment because the state intentionally used race to draw the map. So the Supreme Court resolves this dispute by holding that the plaintiffs in the first case had not shown Louisiana's initial map violated the VRA. So the court held that the evidence showed that the state used race-neutral redistricting criteria, including partisan goals to protect incumbents, to draw the districts. And according to the court, Section 2 imposes liability on states only when the circumstances give rise to a strong inference that intentional discrimination on the basis of race has occurred. And it is the plaintiff's burden, the court added, to disentangle race from any other goals the state legislature may have when drawing districts. Like Louisiana, Alabama was sued following the 2020 redistricting cycle, and the federal court held that the state violated Section 2 by not including an additional majority black congressional district. Last year, the court ordered Alabama to use a court-drawn map that included the additional district, and the state sought review of the decision in the Supreme Court. Those applications are still pending. So likely, now as a result of this decision, Alabama is going to be able to go back to using a map which does not include those racially drawn districts. Now, the same thing is happening down here in Florida. DeSantis has for some time encouraged the Florida State House to come together for a special session and use newly drawn congressional maps to get rid of what will now be 4 former Democrat districts. They met today, shortly after the announcement of this decision in the Supreme Court, and this newly drawn congressional map passed 83-28. When that happened, there was a Democrat politician on the floor of the House and she started screaming into a bullhorn and causing a big scene. So you can see here now, you will have a very different congressional landscape in this area.
Mr. Speaker.
Show the bill passes. Read the next bill.
None on the desk, Mr. Speaker.
All right, so Florida has redistricted. That is now going to be +4 Republican down here. In addition to that, the efforts to clean up voter rolls still continue in the 30-plus states that the United States government is currently suing, as well as states that have voluntarily given up their voter rolls for consideration. North Carolina being one of these states that a lot of attention has been paid to. And although the North Carolina Board of Elections had previously suggested there would likely be some people on the rolls who shouldn't be there, when they actually took a look, they identified approximately 34,000 dead people who were still listed on the state's voter rolls. Now, that's a lot more than what they admitted previously. And the reason they made this discovery is because they used a comprehensive data cross-check against the Federal Systematic Alien Verification for Entitlements database, the SAVE database, which is the same database that the Civil Rights Division of the DOJ has been attempting to get all states to use so that we can ensure that dead people are not casting ballots. So, the officials submitted the 7.3 million voter records into the SAVE system in April as part of the ongoing effort to clean up the rolls and ensure only eligible citizens are able to vote. And the North Carolina State Board of Elections Executive Director Sam Hayes admitted the massive number of deceased people on their voter rolls caught him off guard, probably because it's the first time he or anybody else in North Carolina has ever bothered to look. Certainly, it's the first time it's happened publicly. While we expected to find some cases, Steve said, this is higher than we anticipated. The benefit of entering into cross-state and federal database checks is that it allows us to uncover issues just like this. Our goal is to use every available and legal tool at our disposal to achieve the most accurate voter rolls possible. Now, we must roll up our sleeves and begin the hard work and the act of verifying that every person registered to vote in North Carolina is legally eligible. Our team, along with our state and federal, will do what's necessary to meet this responsibility. So this press release from the NCBSE stressed that North Carolina already receives weekly updates on in-state deaths from the North Carolina Department of Health and Human Services, which are then handled at the county level. However, the SAVE match that they just did is helping to catch voters who perhaps moved out of state, maybe registered in North Carolina, but then died elsewhere. So that gap wouldn't have been caught otherwise. Officials said that the presence of these names on the rolls, of course, does not necessarily mean that illegal votes have been cast in their names. I would imagine that's something they can probably check if they wanted to, though. But the board says it will now follow established verification procedures, cross-check additional databases, and work with county boards to remove those people who are dead. Republican North Carolina Congressman Mark Harris reacted on X, and he called the situation a failure and demanded immediate action. He says, this isn't a mistake. It's a failure. Election integrity is non-negotiable. Fix it now. Pass the Save America Act. Ironically, despite the fact that many people want the Save America Act passed, it's just been announced that John Thune, the man who I mentioned yesterday as essentially the roadblock to having the Save America Act even brought for a vote, or let alone being passed, is definitely the guy who is stopping it from happening. Not only is John Thune refusing to even bring the SAVE Act to the Senate floor, he is also refusing to vote on stopping a central bank digital currency. Both of those things are highly, highly concerning. President Trump, of course, has made the SAVE Act one of his top priorities. The House just passed a series of things today, including FISA renewal, which I haven't had a chance to take a look at, the funding for, I believe, DHS, and some other form of funding as well. Can't remember exactly. I'll probably talk about it tomorrow. I didn't get a chance to read into it, but they have passed that, and that is now moving on to the Senate. But the one thing the Senate isn't doing is CBDCs or Save America. Now, keeping in line with the removal of these 34,000 people in North Carolina, Judicial Watch has long been embroiled in a lawsuit with the state of Oregon. And in this federal election lawsuit, Judicial Watch has just had a major victory. The state of Oregon has agreed to remove up to 800,000 dirty names from their voter rolls. Now, Judicial Watch is already being responsible for the removal of some 6 million names from the voter rolls all around the country. So we can now add nearly another million of them. And I would be pretty interested to take a look at the voting tallies that are announced after the next election in the state of Oregon. So I just wanted to give Judicial Watch a big shout out for their efforts and their continued efforts to help us bring some form of accountability to the election security sector. All right. Now, also, I wanted to show you this interesting piece from my friend Andrew Paquette, also known as Art Zark at Zark Files on X. Andrew was the researcher who had identified many algorithmic election theft opportunities in the state of New York. So he's got a database for us right here. And he says, this is what fraud looks like. Number one, you've got 40 people with the same family name in the entire state. 25 of those 45 people also have the same first name. All but one of those people with the same first name are born on July 7th, but they're born in different years. Number three, their registration dates for all but one of them are all within the same week. Now, despite the fact that these are clearly the same person, each one has a unique voter ID number. And each record is in a different county, so there's no overlap. And the only way you would see this is if you're like Andrew, you're looking at the entire state. For those that do have a mailing address, and because some of them don't have a mailing address, including the one record with a non-7/7 birthday, they're all actually going to the same rented mailbox, which is actually not someplace you can legally register to vote. But of course, this is New York. Number 7, for those where a signature is available. Wouldn't you know it, it's the same signature. Now, these individual names from the records were canvassed, and it turns out the name is not associated with any of the 19 addresses that were associated with these voter registration records, which means for some reason the remaining addresses could not be checked for a variety of reasons. So, in effect, what you have here is 25 records, and all of them are fake. Now, you can take a look here, and you can see most of them are, as he said, registered on the same date or within a few days of each other in either September or October of 2020. All of them born virtually July 7th. One of them was born on January 10th of 1948, but a lot of them appear to be born in 78, 79, 80. All of them have their own unique voter ID, all of them having the exact same name, all of them having the same signature, all of them going to the same rented mailbox. This is a series of voter registration records which clearly demonstrate that what we're looking at is a pattern for fraud. If you are not following Andrew, I highly suggest you do. I bring his work every time I can, and there's far more work that he's doing on a daily basis than I can even bring to you. So he's a great follow, especially if you live in New York and you want to keep up with his efforts to expose this stuff. At Zark Files, Z-A-R-K Files on X. All right, we also have a great bit of news coming out of Pennsylvania and the Supreme Court ruling there related to election cast vote records. Now, it's been pretty much everybody's assumption that voting records should be publicly available information, but the state of Pennsylvania was doing everything they could to make them private, to stop people from actually seeing the cast vote records. In 2021, Heather Honey from Verity Vote asked Lycoming County, Pennsylvania for their cast vote records from 2020. She was denied. But for over 5 years, Heather and Verity Vote have battled with the County Office of Open Records and 3 different court jurisdictions. Yesterday, the Pennsylvania Supreme Court finally ruled that cast vote record files must be made publicly available. So the CRV file is essentially a receipt of everything the tabulator machine scanned. You can read the full opinion, but we're not going to do that today. Here's a short recap. Basically, each election ballot is fed into a tabulator machine. That counts the voter's intent by scanning. Election jurisdictions have several tabulators at different counting locations. Each tabulator keeps an internal record of how many ballots it processes and some other key data along with it. That includes timestamps, the info for the precinct, other data like the number of bubbles it counted for President, Dem, President, Republican, Senate 1, Dem, Senate 1, Republican, Senate 2, Dem, and so on. And the cast vote record serves as a similar purpose to a cash register receipt. It closes out the slips at the end of the day, and it tells you, just all of the information that you would need to know. Anybody who's ever done financials for a business, if you were handling cash, I'm sure you've seen something similar. So typically, the data from these tabulators flows into the county's election management server. And then from there, it goes to the state system server and then on to Edison Research, which merges all U.S. election data. And then Edison provides it to the National Election Pool of news organizations. This is a group of broadcasters that are putting out election results that we see on TV. When you see that scroll at the bottom of TV, that's the information that is coming from Edison and then to the national organization. Now, they can prove spikes in voting for a specific candidate because we've seen it. If you'll remember, going back to 2020, there were vote flips, there were vote spikes, there were deletions in subtle ways, but there was definitely something strange that was happening with the vote counts. Now, they can prove that spike, and they can prove it if they have the information from the tabulators. They can prove if the results were manipulated either in the tabulator or if it was manipulated somewhere downstream after it leaves that precinct and moves on to the bigger systems. Now, the first court, Lycoming County Trial Court, said that cast vote records should be made public and their disclosure does not violate ballot secrecy. They said that Heather Honey lacked standing because she did not live or vote in Lycoming County. So the court ruled that the 3 interveners from Lycoming County did, in fact, have standing. That included a local businessman, a retired state trooper, and Republican State Representative Joe Ham. Next, we had the case with the Commonwealth Court, which was an en banc case, and the majority reversed the lower trial court ruling. They allege that cast vote records are not public information. They are the digital equivalent of ballots. Therefore, they are exempt. Judge McCullough and Wallace dissented. They said disclosure supports transparency without harming secrecy. And then finally, you have it getting to the Pennsylvania Supreme Court. They made several statements affirming that cast vote records are explicitly subject to public inspection and the cast vote record files must be turned over immediately. The Democratic majority court said its unanimous decision was a way to satisfy the voting public that our elections are safe, secure, and accurate. It's hilarious. So the court went on to say that CVRs lack any voter identifying information, and the risk of releasing CVR info is no greater than the published election results we see on television or get from the media. So the Lycoming Office of Open Records, who had originally denied Honey's request, had stated that the CVR files are the equivalent of inspecting a ballot box. Lawyers representing the county used that same argument throughout the 3 court jurisdictions, and they also proclaimed that tabulators were equivalent to the machines people use to cast their vote. The court ruling said, no, they are not. So according to Verity Vote, the justices carve out consideration for CVRs that aren't randomized. Nobody really thinks about this issue properly. This is a line of thinking that you can keep the CVR from the public if there is an edge case where the voter of a ballot can be reasonably guessed. What they miss is the ballot secrecy does not exist to keep information from the from the public, but rather to keep information from the state. If the state builds a voting system that allows them to identify voters of a ballot, they are the ones doing something wrong, not the people asking for public information. So VerityVote is a premier provider of election integrity and many other professional investigations. They do open source work. They've been doing this stuff for years. In August of 2025, VerityVote's founder, Heather Honey, from this lawsuit, was actually hired by the DHS to work on election integrity issues. She currently is the Deputy Assistant Secretary for Elections Integrity in the department's Office of Strategy, Policy, and Plans. Since she got hired by the DHS, she's been attacked relentlessly by the Associated Press, by NPR, and by a whole host of other biased mainstream news outlets. The left-wing FOIA machine, American Oversight, which is staffed by over 40 lawyers, has pummeled DHS, demanding all communications ever produced to and from Honey. Well, they'll get it when they get it, and that's not going to do anything to help them in their efforts to destroy Heather. So I just wanted to give a big shout out to Heather for successfully carrying that into its inevitable conclusion. All right, before we move on to a couple of quick stories about immigration and aliens, I have a special message from our friends over here on Rumble. You guys, if you have not yet tried 1775 coffee, you still have an opportunity to do so. They've got some of those starter kits available. In those starter kits, you're going to get several types of high-quality coffee, including their bold dark roast, their smooth medium roast, and their Vitality mushroom coffee, which is just delicious and is not going to get you all fried up. It's all made from the highest quality beans, single origin, small batch, toxin and mold-free. And you're also going to get some freebies with the bags of coffee, including the gold spoon clip, a strong frother, and a black 1775 tumbler. All told, it's $170 worth of coffee and gear, and it's all yours for just $99. This is for the people who have watched 1775 blow up on Rumble and wonder if it's actually something they should try. It really is. And to find out for yourself, all you got to do is go to 1775coffee.com/studio and grab a starter kit before they're gone. Inside, you will find a bag of bold beans, clean fuel, and a morning routine that stands for something just like Rumble does. You can also use that QR code on screen or the link that you will see below the video. Thank you very much to Rumble and 1775 Coffee. All right, now let's head on over to Michigan. I know we got problems with elections and integrity and security in Michigan, but we're going to be talking about a arrest for the illegal use of illegal aliens at a business in Royal Oak Steakhouse. This time it is Kyoto Japanese Steakhouse in Royal Oak, Michigan. Interesting for me because I've actually been to this restaurant. Great sushi. 10, 15, 20 years ago. It was a long time ago that I went there. But essentially, the owner of the restaurant, Japanese, I believe he's Japanese, his name is Yang Ni, was just federally indicted for harboring illegal aliens and using them to run his restaurants. So the feds found 28 people, 17 of them who were undocumented, living in various properties that were owned by Mr. Yang. And they were basically set up as dorms for these illegal aliens to live at. Now, the circumstances of these dorms were apparently dire, not a nice place to live. And because this was essentially labor exploitation, the DOJ does not look kindly upon it. Charges of conspiracy, harboring illegal aliens for commercial advantage and private financial gain, fraud, and misuse of immigration documents are all part of Mr. Yang's charges. Now, I don't know if Yang himself is a naturalized American citizen or if he was naturally born here, didn't have to get his papers, but this could spell the end of Kyoto Japanese Steakhouses in Royal Oak, Michigan. So I'll be keeping an eye on this. We've also, from the Trump DOJ, had an announcement that they have just sued a big tech company called Cloudera. Now, this one is particularly insidious. Cloudera was blocking American citizens trying to get a job at their company in favor of funneling all available jobs to people who were holding foreign worker visas. Now, what's hilarious is that this company sued President Trump in 2017 over his initial refugee ban. Wait until you hear what Cloudera was doing. They're a major Silicon Valley tech company, and they were deliberately discriminating against American citizens in favor of hiring foreigners so that they could pay them less and probably make more money. Now, this is a case coming from the Civil Rights Division, Harmeet Dillon's division, and they accuse Cloudera of violating the Immigration and Nationality Act. What they did was to create a fake, separate hiring process designed to steer American workers into the fake process, essentially make it impossible for them to reach anybody or get their applications considered. And then these people, Americans, would just give up in desperation. Meanwhile, the real jobs were only being funneled to foreigners and visa holders coming to work either temporarily or, under the status of whatever visa they have. Now, that is extremely illegal. You can't do that. And it's not the only time recently people and businesses have been caught doing this. Truly, truly disgusting. Employers cannot use the perm sponsorship process as a backdoor for discriminating against U.S. workers, Harmeet Dillon said. The division will not hesitate to sue companies who intentionally deter U.S. workers from applying to American jobs. So how did this scam work? According to the DOJ and others who I have seen actually go through the process online, Cloudera set up a dedicated email address for job applicants that was deliberately configured not to accept emails from outside the company. So an American worker would essentially follow the posted instructions that were given to them by Cloudera. They would immediately get a bounce back message stating that their application could not be processed, and there was no way for them to reach anyone at Cloudera. And then they would just give up, throw their hands up in desperation and try to go get a job somewhere else. So the DOJ said the complaint alleges Cloudera intentionally created a separate recruitment and hiring process to deter U.S. workers from applying, and also never even considered them. For these lucrative technology jobs, the company is earmarked for people only with temporary employment visas. So they create the fake email account. The fake email account can't accept emails from outside the company, but they would instruct Americans to use that non-working email address to apply for a job that they knew they were never going to even offer them. So the division received a charge of employment discrimination from one U.S. worker who tried to apply using the email they had set up, that Cloudera had set up, but received that bounce back notification. When sponsoring current employees under the Permanent Labor Certification Program, that's the PERM, Cloudera purposefully failed to recruit U.S. workers in good faith. Truly a disgusting series of behaviors. And you just can't even imagine. We have no concept of how many Americans were negatively affected as a result of these unfair hiring practices. So America's civil rights and labor laws are pretty clear. If you want to sponsor people with temporary visas for permanent residency, you cannot discriminate against U.S. workers. In fact, employers must sign under penalty of perjury that the job opening does not involve unlawful discrimination by race, creed, color, national origin, age, sex, religion, handicap, or citizenship. These protections are to ensure that U.S. workers are given a fair opportunity to compete for jobs because non-immigrant visa programs have been deliberately exploited to replace rather than supplement American workers with lower paid, lower skilled labor. So the DOJ is seeking a court order that would stop these illegal hiring practices, fine the company for every single victim, and require the company to pay lost wages to American workers who were shut out and allow for any other corrective measures the judge finds appropriate. This action, part of the Trump administration's Protecting U.S. Workers initiative, which targets companies that illegally favor temporary visa workers over American citizens. Since the launch, the initiative has already produced 10 settlements. So in 2017, Cloudera was one of 97 major companies that filed an amicus brief in federal court suing President Trump's temporary travel ban on refugees and visa holders from certain countries. And they joined a bunch of other big tech firms in claiming that this policy harmed their business interests. They could no longer hire foreign talent from these areas. And it turns out that the company was actually just rigging their own system against American workers. I can't wait to find out how many Americans attempted to apply for jobs at Cloudera, because whether they would have gotten the job or not, the fact that they applied or attempted to apply and were immediately shut out over the span of how many years is Cloudera now going to be on the hook to pay them a salary? This might put them out of business. I mean, possibly, depending on how many Americans attempted to work there, which I think is totally appropriate. Now, take a look at this. As a result of the investigative work of Nick Shirley and other on-the-ground citizen journalists, an individual in Rochester, Minnesota, started looking around their town, seeing if perhaps they had the signs and symptoms of fraudulent businesses that might be easily identifiable. So a longtime resident of Rochester spoke to Alpha News and said that after he saw Nick Shirley's videos, it sort of prompted him to start paying closer attention, looking around town and seeing if maybe there's a building or a series of buildings that could stand out as suspicious. And he found one pretty quickly. This building right here, the 1500 building. In the same building, you've got a Democrat Farber Laborer office, which is like DFL. That's like the Democrat Socialist Party of Minnesota. They run things, not the regular Democrats. There's also a mosque in this building. There's also a Somali community center. And there are 6 transportation companies all in the same building. Now, there is also a new autism center that is in the same building. Looks like there may be a couple of daycare centers as well. But undoubtedly, most of it is probably going to be a money laundering scheme. Now, let's take a look at a quick clip from Qasim Basuri. He is a Somali business owner. 4 months ago, after President Trump called Somalians coming to the United States of America to scam our country garbage, he got really upset. And he put out a video attacking President Trump and saying about how badly his feelings were hurt that President Trump would accuse him and his community of doing something illegal, something that shouldn't be done. Well, he's also a St. Paul City Council member, the first one from Somalia. And guess what? Yesterday, his business, A+ Universal Child Care and Learning Center, was raided by the FBI. So President Trump was actually right on target.
Our president to call every Somali garbage, it's unacceptable. It's very unacceptable. And majority of the...
Actually, I love it. I'm just going to say, I love it.
Somali leaders and communities are in the same page at that. We have over 80 to 100,000 Somalis that live in Minnesota, which is the largest population outside of Mogadishu, Somalia, anywhere in the world, living here in Minnesota, where I am right now. And to have our president call us garbage is not acceptable. My children who are born here are not garbage. And I don't accept him saying that about our Somali community and our Somali people here. We're not going back anywhere. This is our home. So America is our home. My children were born here. This is their home. We're not going back. So if anybody needs to apologize, it's Donald Trump.
You sure about that? You sure about that? You sure about that?
Well, it all depends on how the investigation pans out into his business and what kinds of crimes he's actually done. Now, luckily, he was on hand yesterday, shortly after federal agents raided A+ Universal Child Care and Learning Center in Shakopee as part of that sweeping federal sting, taking into possession of the FBI the records of many different Somali-owned businesses because they are accused of engaging in rampant fraud. And Mr. Qasim Basuri, along with co-owner Hassan Ali Mohammed, who is the head of the Minnesota Dawa Institute, were both on hand, but it looks like only Qasim was willing to speak to a reporter at the scene. Now, this is all not new. Scrutiny on these daycare centers and these Somali-owned businesses has been ongoing for a long time. Nick Shirley's partner in crime, in investigative crime, in these instances, Dave, he's put together the sauce on these things, and it just took somebody with Nick Shirley's platform to bring it to the American public and elevate it to the status of criminal indictments within the DOJ. Gotta love it.
According to them, they have a search warrant.
Yes, sir.
And I'm still trying to wait and see what the search warrant says, but We are still operational. Our daycare is running, but they are, I guess, doing an investigation that I don't know about. And I'm waiting to see the warrant. So when I looked at the ring camera this morning, they came in, guns out, into a child care center, which is banned in the state of Minnesota to come in with a gun. So it doesn't make sense why they would have to come in with the guns, not showing no warrants, not showing anything, coming in, and then they came back and taped off my ring cameras, my cameras inside. So they taped everything up before they started doing what they're doing. Very disturbing and shocking, because it's not okay for them just to show up and guns drawn out to a child care center without warning, where we have to take care of children.
It's actually totally cool. You just don't understand how things are supposed to work. You're also used to the idea of just being able to successfully fleece the people of the United States since coming here under our care, with our help, to get yourself established, being given a tremendous boost. And what did you use it for? You used it to destroy any goodwill that may have been out there for you. Now, J.D. Vance also spoke earlier today about the continued efforts of his fraud investigation team, and he said that we're not anywhere close to being finished. Also wanted to give a big thank you to Nick Shirley. He said people were telling me it was going to take at least 6 months before anything would happen. From the time that Nick Shirley's video came out to the time the raids began, it was only 3 months.
Do you expect some type of accountability beyond political, some type of accountability for Attorney General Ellison or Governor Walz?
Well, we have to follow the law where it leads. And what we know is that there were multiple Minnesota authorities who were turning a blind eye to this fraud. What we don't yet know is whether they knew it was going on as it was going on, but that's one of the things that we're looking at with these investigations. We're not gonna, we're not gonna let anybody who committed a crime off the hook. And in fact, if you're a senior officer, if you're the Attorney General or the Governor or any other elected official, we're gonna look extra hard at what you knew and when you knew it and how connected your actions were to this fraud scheme. But it's part of the reason why we're serving these warrants, Will, is because of course people don't come out and tell you, oh yeah, I knew that the Quality Leering Center was committing fraud and people were getting rich off of it and I did nothing. People don't say that. So we've got to do the investigatory work to understand what was known, when it was known, and by whom. That's a big part of the reason why the fraud investigation, these warrants that we saw being served all across the city of Minneapolis, why that's such a big deal is because we're finally starting to really get into the nitty-gritty of what we knew, of what people were involved in this fraud scheme. But regardless of whether there was criminal wrongdoing on behalf of the governor, of course, like I said, well, we're going to let the law make those determinations. We know that he turned a blind eye towards this. I mean, you have people, Will, who came into this country, many of them illegally, and 6 months later they're driving Mercedes despite the fact that they don't have a job. That doesn't happen without some defrauding of the American taxpayer. The fact that they turned a blind eye towards it for so long is a scandal. We're also going to find out whether it was criminal.
And I believe that it was. Tim Walz and Keith Ellison, of course, they had some knowledge. They had some part to play in the cover-up. So thank you very much, J.D. Vance. Please follow the evidence where it leads. I don't think Tim Walz and Keith Ellison are going to find themselves without an indictment by the end of this circumstance. Now, this is a longer report. We're not actually going to watch the entire thing. I just wanted to encourage you to watch it. This is by Sarah Gonzalez from The Blaze. She did a similar investigation in Texas, except in Texas, what you have is a series of daycares that are owned and operate, also autism centers, the exact same playbook that you have in Minnesota and in Maine and in Ohio, except these are operated by Chinese citizens with connections to the Communist Party back in the People's Republic of China. And it would appear that they are not only defrauding the United States government, but they're also selling H-1B visas. So I encourage you to take a look at this report. They have hidden camera footage, and they actually speak to the owner of one of these things. And look at this freaking car.
This stick here, just closed and will be new open.
But you have new H-1Bs listed. Is it true that you're...
Now, take a look. Not only has he made enough money to buy this incredible car with this is probably a wrap, but if it's not a wrap and these are individual copper panels that they have put on here, or if it's just a fancy paint job, doesn't matter. It shows that there's a lot of money to be made in this thing. Now, just to show you what this suspicious about this, we're talking about child care centers. Child care centers that are applying for H-1B visas for foreign workers to come in and have jobs like market research analyst and supply chain analyst. Those are not jobs that you would expect to see at the Allen Infant Care Center or at the autism center that is operating right next door to it. So there is obviously something happening here, which is why the investigation in Texas needs to get just as much attention as the investigations into the other states that I mentioned. Now, I would also like to mention that it's just been announced that Orleans Parish Sheriff Susan Hudson has just been indicted on 30 brand new counts. That includes alleged malfeasance and payroll fraud. This is just a couple of days before her term ends. So officially, she is still the sheriff of Orleans Parish. This is an indictment brought by Liz Murrell for LA's office. She is the attorney general of the state of Los Angeles, and this is part of a months-long investigation into the finances and the operations at the county jail. Now, in addition to Susan Hudson, the sheriff's office CFO, Bianca Brown, has also been indicted. She's facing 20 felony counts. Sheriff Hudson is charged with malfeasance in office for 14 counts. Conspiracy to commit malfeasance in office, that's 4 counts. Filing or maintaining false public records, that's 3 counts. Conspiracy to commit filing or maintaining of false public records, 2 counts. Obstruction of justice in 3 counts. And conspiracy to commit obstruction of justice for another 3 counts. Her bond is set at $300,000. Now, her CFO, Bianca Brown, is charged with 4 counts of malfeasance in office, conspiracy to commit that malfeasance, and another 4 counts, filing or maintaining false public records for 3 counts, conspiracy to commit filing or maintaining false public records for another 3 counts, obstruction of justice for another 3 counts, and conspiracy to commit obstruction of justice for another 3 counts. And, of course, her bond is also set at $200,000. Very, very cool. Love to see it. Now, also, it was determined by Senator Joni Ernst after receiving a Planned Parenthood email that was exchanged with the Biden administration that Planned Parenthood had been apparently communicating with the Biden administration about COVID-era loans that were given to them, over $90 million. These are loans that they were ineligible for, which the Biden administration then later went on to forgive entirely. But in order to escape the scrutiny of the fact that they were organizing the delivery of these loans, they used a code word. And that code word was Benghazi, so that they could evade congressional oversight, receive the loans, and then Congress would be none the awares because it didn't say anything about loans. It was talking about Benghazi.
I uncovered that the Biden administration had given Planned Parenthood affiliates through the Paycheck Protection Program over $90 million, forgave those loans even though they were ineligible. And even worse than that, they tried to obscure the fact that they had done this illegally by using the code word Benghazi. What does Benghazi have to do with Planned Parenthood? Absolutely nothing. But instead of using the name Planned Parenthood, they substituted the code word Benghazi. That way, if anyone tried to FOIA or search for information on Planned Parenthood, it wouldn't be found. I uncovered that.
Well, we found it. And, of course, that will now be investigated. All right. We will go ahead and finish with the latest news on Tina Peters. Unfortunately, Tina Peters has been denied a bond hearing, so she will remain in prison as her case continues to be evaluated. She was scheduled to appear before Mesa County District Court Judge Matthew D. Barrett, but he denied Tina Peters' renewed motion for an appeal bond. By denying this bond, the judge cited Tina Peters' access to private air travel, her history of bond violations, the prior conviction she's currently incarcerated for, repeated delays in the case, and he concluded that she is not unlikely to flee and that further appeals appear frivolous and aimed at delay. So he just simply denied her without even allowing her to have a hearing. Essentially, he's making the case that if Tina Peters is allowed to get out on bond, she's simply likely to flee the country, which everybody knows is completely ridiculous. So very concerning, but of course, Tina Peters and her team will continue to fight to get her freed and ensure that at some point in the future, she will be able to live the rest of her life without having to deal with all of the BS that she's had up until this point. Okay, I'm going to go through the final thank yous over here on Rumble, but before I do, let me just give you one final message from Rumble. And you guys have probably noticed that Rumble is continuing to grow, growing at a quick pace, not going to be slowing down anytime soon. They're looking to build a real alternative to big tech that puts creators first and actually protects free speech. And this is why they've now got Rumble Premium available. It's an easy way to upgrade your experience because with Premium, you get ad-free viewing across the platform, no pre-rolls, no interruptions, just the content that you came for. Plus, Premium members unlock exclusive content like bonus videos, behind-the-scenes drops, and a lot more from your favorite creators. Right now, Rumble is offering a $10 off deal with an annual subscription. To take advantage of it, you just go to rumble.com/premium and use the promo code STUDIO at checkout. Once again, that's rumble.com/premium, promo code STUDIO, and you'll get no ads, more freedom, and content that you actually care about. That's the deal. Thank you very much to Rumble. And let's see. Oh, thank you over here on Rumble to Surter. He says, the irony isn't lost on me. The same party this act was because of is defying it right now. And then Principled Enigma says, in that last post, I was just trying to find another excuse to give you another buck. Love you, bro. Okay, I'll make this one $2. It's only $1, but that's fine. Either way, your generosity and your support really means a lot. This one is $2 from BDR1776. I just got in from doing the yard work, so I missed most of the show, but I'll catch it on rewind. But I need to finish up my yard work before I make the great escape from Massachusetts to Florida for a month. Awesome, dude. Hope you have a good time. All right. And then jumping back over here to Pilled. Let me see. Thank you to No Thanks Joe, who says, thanks, Zach and Lisa. Appreciate your great reporting. God bless and be safe. Filter Dog, Democrat Wisconsin Governor Tony Evers says the state's congressional map is gerrymandered for Republicans and needs to be redrawn. And the only problem is it was actually drawn by Tony Evers. He put that one together, and now he's claiming that he himself gerrymandered it for Republicans. Totally freaking ridiculous. Sean Joe, thank you for the cookie. Sean Joe, also thank you for gifting a 6-month bronze tier subscription to Porpoiseful and another one to Valhalla. Filter Dog says DOJ is now pushing to seize James Comey's profits from his crime book as prosecutors believe part of the reason he posted a threat to President Trump was to drum up sales from his book. Okay, they are actually explicitly stating that. Then I was correct yesterday. One Thunder, thank you for the cookie. Sean Joe, thank you for the cookie. And One Thunder, thank you for another cookie. Oh, you didn't need to do that, Principled Enigma. He said, sorry about that. Here's another one. You are totally all good, bro. Thank you again very much for the generous support. I really do appreciate it. All right, you guys. And just to remind everybody about my new sponsor, Pet Club, which I need to fix my screen. Why is it not working? Okay. Okay, so if you head on over to redpillnews.petclub247.com, you can pick up all of the products that they have available for both people and pets. And they're all going to be infused with Coriolus Versicolor, which is turkey tail mushrooms. Coriolus Versicolor supercharges your immune system to help it work as good as it possibly can so that if you or your pets are going to be fighting anything off, then obviously you're going to be able to do it with maximum effectiveness. But they've got they sent me a whole bunch of stuff. Me and Lisa have been taking the Enforce Mushroom Coriolus Versicolor formula right here, which they have a special process for the absolute best extraction of Coriolus Versicolor that you can get anywhere on the market. Again, redpillnews.petclub247.com. I'm actually going to have the owners of the company on the show here very soon to talk to us about it. We also got this for the dogs, which is kind of just like a Coriolus Versicolor additive that we put in their food, and they seem to love it so far. They also gave us some biscuits for the dogs. Chi-Chi doesn't have the teeth to eat them, but Muffin loves those ones. For Chi-Chi, we actually have the freeze-dried liver bites, which are also infused with Coriolus Versicolor. And they've even got stuff for horses as well. Anyways, if you head on over to redpillnews.petclub247, obviously you will be supporting the show, but more importantly, you'll be supporting yourself. Somebody just yesterday had reached out to me about an unfortunate diagnosis their wife had for cancer. And the reason that I started looking into turkey tail and its extracts was because a couple of months ago, I brought you guys a show, or a story in a show about a man who had adopted a puppy. Very shortly after adopting the puppy, it started growing a tumor on its face. It was getting to the point where basically they were going to have to cut off half of this dog's face, and it wasn't going to survive. So the vet told him, you should put him down. And he said, you know what, I'm going to try one more thing. And so he started giving him turkey tail mushroom extract, and that dog survived. 5 years later, the tumor is totally gone. And there are all kinds of testimonials that you can find on the website. I'm going to put together a little video of those so that I can show those. Also, my friends over at Tamarack Garden. Garden. And thank you to all of the Patriot-owned businesses that you can find in the description of every video. You can also find my address. You can also find my email. You can also find every single place that you can support the program when you're not watching live. Anything that you want to find, including the details that I talk about in regards to alternative therapies, is in the description of every single video. So just keep that in mind. Look there before you email me asking for me to send you something. It would just really help me out. Either way, thank you very much for being here. I'll be back tomorrow at 5 p.m. for another episode of Red Pill News Live. Until that time, good luck. God bless. I will pass out the gold pills, and I will see you guys tomorrow. Hey, please do me a favor and hit that like button before you go. That would be awesome.